A calm night in Italian Harlem. A single storefront light glows like a lighthouse on the corner. Inside, a heavy wool coat hangs on the shoulders of a man who rarely raises his voice. He doesn't have to. On this block, the rhythm stays smooth because he asks it to. No shouting, no rush, just quiet errands that look like groceries and decisions that let the neighborhood sleep easy. This is the story of Anthony Salerno. You might know him by another name, Fat Tony. Settle in, adjust your volume, and before we dive in, drop a comment with your local time and where you're watching from. Chapter 1. A Cigar in Italian Harlem. Evening settles over East Harlem like a soft coat pulled up against a patient wind. The block along East 115th Street finds its rhythm easily. Someone drags a metal gate halfway down and leaves it there like a raised eyebrow. A kid on a milk crate counts change the old-fashioned way, coins clicking like tiny clocks. Across from him, a storefront gives off a comfortable amber, the kind that makes a person feel remembered by name. Inside, chairs scrape gently, voices stay low, and the air says there is nothing urgent here. Only time, only neighbors, only the slow and steady clock of a city that has learned to breathe through the nose. The sign outside is plain. Locals do not need a sign. They know the address like they know the wrinkles on their own hands. 416 East 115th Street. The Palmer Boys Social Club. The room is simple. There is a table with a nick in the corner that has seen a lifetime of elbows. There is a radio that prefers music with horns and drums. There is a faded photo on the back wall whose edges have curled a little from summers gone by. The floor squeaks only when it wishes to be heard. And at the back, a man with a wide chest and a steady face holds a cigar that seems to hold him right back. He is Anthony Salerno to the papers and Tony to the sidewalk, but most people do not use names here. They lean in and say, "My friend." They tap 2 fingers on the table. They nod. The man listens. He listens the way a careful reader underlines a good sentence in his head. His hat sits just so on the chair beside him. His coat is a whole conversation about wool and winters. He is not in a hurry. He has never been in a hurry. He believes that the city is a set of linked gears, and that if fun turns too fast, the others will grind. So he keeps the pace. Outside, a bus sighs and continues on. A couple argue softly about a bag of groceries that split and let onions roll into the gutter. A dealer of cards in a back room laughs like a handsaw in wood. Somewhere a dog decides this is a good time to sing. In the social club, the radio shifts to a standard, a tune that pairs well with velvet booths and late hours, and a few shoulders lift as if remembering an old dance step. Tony raises a hand and 2 men drift closer, neither eager nor reluctant, simply in tune. He speaks in a voice that belongs to wool coats and broken-in shoes. He talks about the weather first. He always talks about the weather first. It is a way of measuring who is listening and who is only waiting to talk. Then he asks how the block feels. Not the rents, not the numbers, not the rumors. The block. Are the old ladies getting their deliveries on time? Did the bodega get that new freezer? Does the barber need someone to look at the light that flickers? Small talk, people say, but not here. Here, small talk is a map. There is a ritual to the evening. Someone checks the television in the back room and pretends not to care about baseball. Someone else arranges cards by habit and does not play. A cousin from the Bronx brings cannoli in a white box tied with string and leaves them open on the table like an offering to good manners. The cigar smoke lifts and settles like a curtain call. A young runner, the kind of kid who wears his cap tight and his future looser, approaches with the cautious energy of someone who has both good news and bad timing. He does not speak right away, that would be rude. He stands near a coat rack and waits to be waved in by an older man with eyes like postage stamps. The wave comes. The kid moves closer. He explains that someone from out of the neighborhood asked questions by the corner yesterday. The questions were about the club, about who comes and goes. The kid says it was probably nothing. The kid says everything is probably nothing until it is not. Tony listens and says he trusts the kid to keep listening too. He says the block is a choir. He says a choir sounds best when everyone keeps to their notes. He does not raise his voice. He does not have to. It is a gift to move a room by leaning back rather than forward, to guide by posture, to say much by saying little. A man with that gift does not need to carry anything more than a calm stare and a reliable hat. On the wall, the old photo watches. The photo remembers summers when the hydrant bloomed and the kids screamed with joy and the city smelled like hot meta and bakery sugar. The photo remembers when the Uptown trains clicked like metronomes and the neighborhood felt smaller because everyone knew the names of the cats. Tony remembers too. He speaks softly about the old days when the crew worked like shoulders under the same yoke. He does not use the word power, he uses the word order. He says order is kinder. It makes sure a grandmother can sleep. It makes sure a shop can open in the morning with coins in the till. There are visitors sometimes. Men from downtown, men from out of town. They walk in with the kind of care a person uses when entering a church where the language is not their own. They understand that this is a living room, not an office. They understand that drinks are less about thirst and more about ceremony. They understand that the man with the cigar is both a person and a symbol, and that symbols need to be handled like glass. When they sit, there is always the middle distance in the conversation where the talk slows and the truth arrives in single sentences. Things like the price of being known. Things like the cost of asking favors from the wrong people at the right time. Things like how the city itself is a partner who never signs a contract but always expects her cut. Tony listens, nods, sets his cigar down, and when he finally speaks, he does so in the way a doctor gives a diagnosis. Calm, direct, humane. He never calls it advice, he calls it perspective. The door opens and a gust of night comes with a man in a blue hat, one of the old guard. He is one of those people who never seems to be moving quickly even when he is in a hurry. He shakes off the cold and presses a folded newspaper to the table. The headline talks about a federal task force that has found its stride and likes to turn up early. The article is all stern faces and tight phrases. In the club, the news does not feel like an earthquake. It feels like the change in pressure before a storm. People who are good at reading barometers straighten their jackets. Tony does not read the article. He looks at the faces in the photos. He looks the way a tailor looks at thread. Then he asks about a woman on 116th Street whose backroom light has been out for 3 nights. He asks about a kid who once worked the candy store and went off to try his luck in construction and came back because he missed his mother's kitchen more than he liked. He asks about the church that needs a new boiler. He says the envelope will be there before the end of the week. This is not charity. In his eyes, it is ballast. You add a little weight where the boat needs it so the ride stays smooth. For a while, the room gathers around that sense of ballast. Even the city outside seems to sway a little less. The kid with the tight cap refills coffee without being asked. The old guard man smiles like a winter window just starting to fog. Cards are shuffled and reshuffled. The radio decides to be sentimental. Later, when the steady routine starts to taper, 2 men drift to the back table with a folder that does not announce itself. Tony takes it, opens it, glances at the first page, the second, then closes it. He says the only line that matters is the last line. The last line says whether a job is going to make somebody angry in a way that becomes expensive. He says, do not chase nickels in a storm. He says, if the sea is rough, hug the coast. He says there is always next week. The men nod. The folder goes back under the arm like a sleeping cat. A few minutes pass. A shaving of ash falls from the cigar and lands like a grey feather. Tony brushes it away with the back of a knuckle. He stands, and his height seems to measure not inches but influence. People make room for the coat without being asked. He adjusts the hat with a small, almost shy motion, like a man apologizing to his own reflection for being in a hurry when he really is not. He steps outside to breathe the chilled air. The sidewalk is its own living newspaper. A woman in slippers calls to a second-floor window and is answered by the shadow of a hand. A cab slows as if deciding whether to be part of the story, and then moves on. Across the street, a kid practices a layup without a ball. A man with a shy moustache holds a paper bag against his chest like a valentine. Tony watches with the calm of long practice. He does not think of the word boss. He thinks of the word steward. The block does not belong to him. He belongs to the block, and the block notices the way a garden notices the gardener. He turns back toward the club and sees what looks like nothing and feels like a question. It is a car with two people who do not know how to look like they belong. It is a shadow in the building across the street that does not sway with the other shadows. It is a pair of new shoes that has not learned the rhythm of this block's pavement. Tony tastes the air like a chef tasting a broth. Then he smiles. The smile says patience. The smile says, not tonight. He steps back in. Inside, the coffee has grown darker and better. Someone tells a story about a winter on Arthur Avenue when the snow wore itself out trying to fall. Someone else remembers a summer at the beach where the gulls sounded like gossiping aunts. A third person says he once met a movie star who smelled like cologne and effort. Another round of laughter, gentle and warm. There is light humor in the room, because there is trust. Without trust, jokes turn into knives. With trust, they are only hats thrown on a bed and retrieved later without drama. The young runner hears a line that sounds like a lesson and tucks it away the way people tuck a lucky coin into a shoe. He watches the older men for cues on how to be quiet without being small. He learns that stillness is not the same as weakness. He learns that listening is a job with full benefits. When the door opens again, the cold is sharper, as if someone has taken a whetstone to it. The two men in the car have left. A streetlight farther down the block blinks and holds. The club prepares to fold itself up for the night. Chairs return to their original positions. The radio whispers a last chord. The cannoli box contains one last survivor, and it is offered to the kid, who refuses twice and accepts on the third offer like a proper gentleman. Tony stands by the door and thanks the room without saying thank you. He tips his hat to the wall where the old photo still supervises. He nods to the men who will lock up, and he steps out to make a small circle of breath in the air. Across the street, the kid with the milk crate has counted his last coin. He looks up, meets the older man's eyes, and nods with a look that says, I understand nothing and everything. Tony nods back with a look that says that is the right amount to understand. He walks a short way down the block. The city at night seems to lower its voice for him. Not out of fear, but out of respect for an arrangement. He considers the long thread that runs from Italian Harlem to the Bronx to downtown and back, loop after loop, stitch after stitch. A thread that is not fully seen except in the way a neighborhood holds together. He knows the thread is watched now by people who carry notebooks and batteries. He knows microphones are like moths that flutter wherever a light is left on. He knows that too many lights make a house look empty even when it is full. He turns back and studies the club from the sidewalk. He has always liked the way the glass reflects the room at night while letting the room see the street. It turns the public into a private painting, and the private into a public mirror. In that reflection, he is not a headline. He is not a defendant. He is not a king on a chessboard. He is a man in a hat who knows the names of the people who carry keys to the block. He is a keeper of hours. A city truck rumbles by, performing its own version of stewardship, scraping along the curb in a musical arrangement of metal on concrete. Tony watches it go and thinks of all the quiet tasks that keep a place whole. Fixing a flicker, telling a young man to sit with his worry until it gets tired and leaves, finding the right words for a widow who needs her rent eased while she steadies herself, calling a friend to call a friend to call a friend so a boiler gets fixed before Sunday. Inside, someone laughs again. The sound slips through the door and into the veins of the street. Tony lets the cigar rest in the crook of his fingers and smiles to himself at something nobody else will ever hear, a sentence that belongs to him alone. He turns his coat collar up and lets the night hang on his shoulders. Then he goes back in to close the circle. The room recognizes him the way a violin recognizes the player who knows the grain of its wood. Chairs push back softly. Voices make room. He sets the cigar down, taps ash into a tray that could tell stories, and says the only thing that needs saying. Keep it simple. Keep it steady. Look out for the old and the young. If anyone asks where you learned that, tell them you learned it on this block. People nod, because it is a good way to end a night. The kid with the cannoli wipes sugar from his sleeve. The old guard man with the blue hat tucks the folded newspaper under his arm, as if he has decided that tomorrow can deal with itself. The men with the folder have already learned the lesson about storms and coasts, and know that tonight is for walking home. Tony reaches for his coat once more. He is not the first to arrive in this room, and he will not be the last. The door is a mouth that has learned to say welcome in all seasons. The sidewalk plays the same melody it played years ago, only slower, only kinder, as if repeating it for a sleepy child. He steps out into the hush, and the hush steps into him. Somewhere deeper in the city, larger tables are being set and larger questions are being asked. But here, on this exact square of concrete, the answer is simple. Protect the rhythm, pay attention, let the block breathe. The wind turns the corner, the hat holds steady, the cigar glows like a tiny lighthouse. The club light flickers once in a friendly way, and then steadies again. The night nods back. Chapter 2. Uptown Crew, Downtown Currents. Morning in Italian Harlem starts with steam. It rises from grates and kettles and cups, and it turns the cold into something you can reason with. On East 115th Street, the storefronts blink awake like patient cats. The bakery opens first and pushes a sugar breeze into the block. The barber follows, sweeping an already clean floor because a clean floor is a promise. The social club door stays shut until it is the right time. Routine is the quiet law here. Anthony Salerno is an old story to the neighborhood, and still a fresh headline to anyone who does not live close enough to know the smell of Sunday sauce. He began, as most neighborhood legends begin, by carrying smaller loads for larger men and learning who needed what and when. He watched the older generation run numbers like they were collecting fog and turning it into coins. He learned that the city speaks two languages at once, the language of paper and stamps, the language of nods and hands. He listened to both. As years peeled by, the block shifted but did not lose the melody. Families moved, new faces showed up with the same basic hopes. The crew along 116th Street and beyond learned to be stewards as much as earners. Keep the noise down, keep the deliveries steady, keep the winters manageable and the summers cooled by open hydrants and borrowed chairs on the sidewalk. The Palmer Boys Social Club was not a palace. It was a kitchen table that never tipped, no matter how many elbows leaned on it. People like to argue about titles: boss, captain, face, ear. Tony did not argue about the word, he argued about the work. He understood that a neighborhood is a set of arteries. If fun clogs, the others suffer. So he kept the blood moving. He liked simple schedules and unsurprising afternoons. Problems should show up slowly, he would say, like tide coming in. If a problem arrives like a wave, someone was not paying attention. In the late morning he would walk the avenue with a pace that suited the cement. Not fast enough to signal urgency, not slow enough to invite curiosity. He would stop by the fruit stand and test the weight of an orange like a judge testing a gavel. He would ask the vendor about his mother. He would pay an exact change because exact change sends a message about respect. Then he would drift to the barber and stand where hair and stories fall together. The barber would always ask whether to trim the hat line. Tony would smile and say the hat line trims itself. By midday he was back at the club, leaning an elbow against the nicked corner, as if he had put it there years ago and trusted it to keep the room from tilting. A steady circle of men filtered in and out. The regulars were a study in consistency. A quiet bookkeeper with hands too clean. A driver who never seemed to remember which stories were his and which were borrowed. A baker who brought goods nobody could pay for and did not accept cash because he was paying an old debt that had nothing to do with money. One runner handled numbers, but he handled them with the softness of a man who knows that numbers are only a way of measuring trust. Another runner handled introduction. He believed that introductions are the oil in a city of hinges. A third handled repairs that do not show up on work orders. He knew which lights flickered and which basement doors forgot to latch. He knew that fixing small things is how you dodge large disasters. None of them wore uniforms. They wore the neighborhood. If you followed the paths of those men, you would see the Uptown crew bending like a river. Some days the current ran into the Bronx for errands at markets where the cheese came wrapped like treasure and the voices carried mile-long smiles. Some days the current drifted downtown, where offices stacked themselves like sandwiches in glass, reflected back the sky like a polite lie. Through it all, Tony remained a soft metronome. He never asked anyone to run that he would not ask to walk. He never asked anyone to speak when a nod would do. Light humor moved freely in the club, because light humor is the grease that keeps serious talk from turning into noise. The driver would tell a story about a time he tried to parallel park near Arthur Avenue, and only realized an hour later that the curb had been pretending to be straight. The bookkeeper would claim he could count an entire bag of coins by touch. The baker would swear that a good cannoli can correct a bad mood faster than an apology. Tony would smile and let the room enjoy itself. Joy is not a luxury, he believed. It is a safety feature. Every so often someone from outside the zip code would step through the door with the right kind of hesitation. The door teaches manners. It tells you to enter like you are arriving in a friend's kitchen, not like you are checking into an office. The visitors would speak of supply and demand, as if they were discussing weather fronts. They would mention downtown currents and uptown reliability, and how the two needed each other to keep the city from getting a fever. On one such afternoon, a man with cuffs sharp enough to slice a peach set down a folder that did not reveal much about itself. He used careful words about scheduling and patience, and a calendar that had to be respected if everyone wanted to sleep well. Tony listened, fingers resting on the table as if keeping time. He asked about routes and congestion. He asked about who carries the last bag of the day, and whether that person has a grandmother on a second-floor walk-up who needs someone to fix a railing. When the visitor said he did not know, Tony said, "Learn it. The city is a classroom. The test is whether you remember the name of the person who holds the back door." The neighborhood paid attention to small measures of dignity. A landlord who raises rent without warning finds his mailbox stubborn. A landlord who listens to a widow in January finds a crew of volunteers carrying oil up a narrow flight of steps. A butcher who slips a good cut into a paper bundle for an old customer learns that his own holiday roast travels to the oven peacefully in the backseat of a reliable car. This was not a myth. It was a ledger of kindness with interest. Tony kept a gentle distance between kindness and leverage. He knew that a favor becomes a chain when you tie it too tight. He told his men to help in ways that could be forgotten with gratitude rather than remembered with fear. The city has enough fear, he would say. Give people relief. Relief buys more time than worry. Worry makes bad math. Relief makes good sleep. Not every day ran smooth. A young man with a grin he had not earned would swagger into the block and announce a plan so large it did not fit through the door. He would talk fast and too loud. He would ask for introductions that should not be handed out like flyers. The room would listen the way a church listens to a thunderstorm, patient and resigned. Tony would tell a story about fishing with his uncle when he was a boy. He would describe how the old man taught him to stand so still that even the river forgot to be suspicious. Speed, Tony said, is for trains. We are a bridge. Bridges do not move. By late afternoon, the club would smell like coffee, cigar, and wool. The radio stuttered between sports chatter and tunes that loved trumpets. The bookkeeper would run a finger across a short list and scratch a single line through a single word. He would nod to Tony. Tony would nod back. A problem that had been swelling into a headache in the morning would turn into a polite farewell by evening. This is what calm leadership looks like from the inside. It is not fireworks, it is plumbing. On a cool day not long after a rain, a visitor named Benny from the Bronx came carrying a white box tied with string. The pastries were as good as rumors had promised. Benny sat and talked about warehouse space that used to be a dance hall, about docks that had learned to be careful, about men who remembered handshakes longer than they remembered dates. Benny said the downtown currents were pulling hard this month. He said the tide was real. Tony said then we hug the coast. He said, do not chase money you cannot fold. The younger runner asked what that meant. Tony said simple. If a job only pays in drama, it is not a job. He said pay attention to work that pays in quiet. Quiet is the currency that lets a neighborhood grow old without break-in. The runner wrote the sentence on the inside of his head and decided to practice it until it felt like muscle memory. In the early evening, the block switched moods. Children became homework students. Shops sank into the glow of closing time. A man with a ladder repaired a sign with a hammer that made delicate noises. The club softened again into its night posture. 2 men took seats near the door and drifted into easy watchfulness. Night guards, more like ushers in a theatre that prefers matinees. Downtown never sleeps, they say. Uptown never forgets, Tony would answer. When downtown currents pressed with urgency, Tony let the pressure travel through him like weather through a tall building. The building creaks. It does not collapse. He let calls go unanswered for an extra hour if the questions could not be answered with kindness. He called back when the city's breath slowed a little. He set appointments at odd afternoon slots because afternoon makes men less dramatic than night. He refused to hold important talks on a Friday because Fridays suffer from high hopes and low patience. Sometimes the talk turned to the old days before he wore the hat with the quiet brim. Back when he was a runner learning which doors knock back, he had made mistakes that taught him better than advice ever could. He once tried to settle a dispute with speed and found that speed knocks over innocent chairs. He once accepted a favor from someone whose favors came wrapped in thorns. He once ignored a small insult instead of answering it with a smaller kindness, and the insult grew into a misunderstanding that took a month to diffuse. He carried those lessons like smooth stones in a pocket. The crew was not a parade. It was a maintenance crew for human connection. One person arranged jobs for men who needed the dignity of early mornings. One person made sure new arrivals from old countries found a friendly face at a counter where the coffee is hot, and the language of nods is universal. One person coached a teenager who wanted to rush toward a kind of fame that ages fast. That coaching saved the teenager from a short road with a sudden cliff. The boy now swept the barber floor with pride and learned to cut hair by watching more than he spoke. A day came when a rumor walked in wearing a tailored suit. It whispered that certain people downtown were reading road maps with fresh eyes, that they were tracing lines between clubs and cafes the way children trace stars to make constellations. The rumor said that the stars had names like crew and family and commission. The rumor said that patience has cousins with badges. The room heard the rumor and did what rooms like this do. It turned down the radio a notch and poured coffee that tasted like resolve. Tony did not panic. He adjusted the rules of calm. Fewer phone calls, more walks, fewer people sitting in any place for longer than a comfortable chat. More messages carried by men who knew that a folded piece of paper is not the point. The point is the look in a man's eyes when you say, "Keep your head." He told the runner with the tight cap to take a side street whenever he could. He told the driver to love red lights and to use them to memorize license plates behind him, not because he wanted to be suspicious, but because he wanted to be accurate. He told the bookkeeper to imagine every list would someday be read by a stranger who does not know the context. Write as if you are talking to your mother, he said. She will not be impressed by fancy words. She will only ask whether you did right by people. Even with the rumors, the work continued. A widow on a high floor needed her rent softened for a season. A shopkeeper needed someone to talk to her landlord with the tone that people use when they want to solve a problem and leave the room with everyone still friends. A late delivery needed to be explained to a chef who planned a menu down to the last sprig of parsley. Tony moved the pieces the way a man moves pillows under a sleeping child, careful not to wake anything that does not need waking. One evening, as rain braided itself across the streetlights, a quiet man with downtown shoes arrived, not nervous but measuring. He asked if the club could suggest a safer route for an arrangement, that had become a little too popular for its own good. Tony listened and then drew a map in words. He spoke of turns that look like detours but are actually exits. He spoke of a warehouse that feels like yesterday and therefore gets ignored by people who only look for tomorrow. He spoke of scheduling. He said the city is like a tired animal. If you pet it against the grain, it will scratch. Move with the fur. The man with the downtown shoes left grateful. The room returned to its slow heartbeat. The baker set down a bag of bread ends and said bread ends are the best part because they are honest. The driver announced that he had learned to love red lights. He enjoys the way the city pauses to think. The young runner reported that he had discovered a new habit. He had learned to stand still for a full minute before he spoke, and in that minute he often realized he did not need to speak at all. The room applauded without clapping. Outside, a boy launched a stick into a puddle and watched it sail like a ship. His mother called him with a bedtime voice. The boy saluted the puddle as if it were a harbour. The club watched through the reflection in the glass and remembered old afternoons when hopes felt like kites. Tony leaned back and let the chair carry his weight. He was not a sentimental man in public, but he understood that a neighbourhood runs on memory the way a watch runs on springs. If you forget the people who taught you where the good bread is, you will get lost. As night built its scaffold, the eyes that do not belong to the block returned. A car idled longer than a car needs to idle. Two shadows took notes in the kind of mental notebooks that cannot be torn up. A light blinked in an apartment where rent gets paid by a different budget than the rest of the building. None of this required panic. It required posture. Posture says we are ordinary, because we are. Posture says our routine is a dialect of survival. Tony stepped to the door and let the night air touch his face. He looked both ways the way mothers teach their children. Then he looked once more for the sake of the men who learned from him. He told the door ushers to go home early. A room with fewer people has fewer stories to mishear. He told the bookkeeper to leave by the back, not because of fear, but because of chess. He told the young runner to take a loaf of the baker's bread to the woman on 116th Street with the bad back. He said add butter. Butter makes advice easier to swallow. Back inside, he told a memory about his own beginning. How he once tried to build a reputation with 2 loud favors and learned that reputations built with noise fall down in the rain. He said he learned to build with silence instead. A silent help that arrives on time gets remembered for years. A noisy help gets remembered until the next noisy thing comes along. The men listened, and so did the room, and so did the radio, which found a muted trumpet that understood. The downtown currents kept tugging. The uptown crew kept steering. In the space between tug and steer, a city finds balance. People believe balance is a still pose, but it is not. It is a constant talk between weight and counterweight, between push and pull, between trust and proof. Tony made balance look easy because he rehearsed it every day. He gave the block what it needed most: predictability. At closing time, the club folded itself neatly. The chairs went under tables like tired cats under beds. The radio sighed into quiet. The hat found its hook. The men stepped into the chill and let it sharpen their thoughts. Across the street, the idling car had gone. In a nearby window, the shadow had learned to sway like other shadows, but the feeling remained. New eyes, fresh batteries, a map being drawn not by locals but by people who think maps are the same thing as territory. Tony looked up at the night and gave it the same nod he would give a neighbour carrying groceries. He reminded himself that a neighbourhood is not a secret, it is a promise. Promises do not fear attention, they just ask to be kept. The next days would bring harder weather, but weather is weather. You dress for it. You plan your walk. You leave 5 minutes early. You bring a second scarf for someone who forgot theirs. He turned to the young runner and said the line he liked to end with on nights like this: keep it simple, keep it steady. The runner asked what simple means when downtown starts writing novels about you. Tony said simple means you do not change the recipe when the bread is good. You watch the oven, you treat the yeast with respect, you cut the loaf with a sharp knife and a gentle hand, And when someone asks why your bread tastes like home, you smile and say it is the water. They laughed softly. The sound travelled down the block and tapped lightly on closed doors. Inside those doors, people turned over in their sleep and settled deeper into pillows. The city, for all its noise and plans and maps, knows when a block is being watched over by people who prefer quiet to drama. It answers with better dreams. Tony put on his coat. The wool held the smell of cigar and coffee in a dozen winters past. He adjusted the brim of the hat. He checked the street once more with eyes that read both shadow and reflection. He let the door close behind him with the soft click of a library book being shelved. Then he walked toward the corner where a bus would sigh, where a boy would kick at a bottle cap, where the next day would begin like all the good days do, with steam, with bread, with unhurried steps. Chapter 3: The Listening City. The city listens in more ways than I'd. It listens with open ears on stoops and with shut mouths at kitchen tables. It listens with antennas and wires and tape that spins in the dark like a careful carousel. On East 115th Street, the listening is mostly human. Faces recognize faces, footsteps recognize footsteps. But beyond the block, a different kind of ear has been trained upon the rhythm. It is patient. It is methodical. It believes that routine is a language and that every language can be translated if you are willing to sit still long enough. Morning brings a shy sun and a fresh coat of ordinary. The bakery dusts sugar across the counter. The barber earns his first sweep of the broom. The social club keeps its calm. Inside the club, the radio murmurs to itself while chairs wait for stories. Outside, a van idles 2 corners away, its driver sipping from a paper cup as if tasting the weather. The van is only a van, the cup is only a cup. The city loves disguises that are not really disguises at all. Federal patience is a special kind of timekeeping. It moves like a slow train across a wide plain. It does not hurry toward the station, it lets the landscape come to it. In offices downtown, a wall calendar is filled with notes written in a neutral hand. Names of streets, times of day. The word routine repeated like a mantra. A map has pins. Strings connect pins the way a child connects stars to draw constellations. The people doing the pinning do not see stars, they see habits. Habits are their constellations. On the block, Tony moves as he always does, a steady figure in a reliable coat. He nods to the fruit vendor, tastes an orange with a small smile and pays exact change. He steps into the club and lets the door close behind him with the soft whisper of familiarity. Inside, the men gather without hurry. A bookkeeper lays down a thin ledger. A driver sets his hat on his knee. A baker places a white box tied with string, as if placing a votive candle. The radio picks a station that does not argue with conversation. Across town, someone listens to a tape while holding a pencil that never touches paper. The pencil is a comfort object, not a tool. The tape holds hours of small talk, weather, baseball, coffee, repairs to a flickering light, names of old ladies who need help with packages, laughter that carries no sharp edges. From time to time the voices lean into a topic that seems promising to the ear that wants promises, and then the voices lean out again. This is how patience is tested. The neighborhood changes in ways that do not announce themselves. A new mural appears where a wall needed color. A grocery starts stocking a different brand of olives and the regulars argue, politely, about flavor and loyalty. A pair of shoes in a window tells you that a buyer has a job that expects polished toes. Another pair tells you that the buyer walks a long way to that job. The city leaves clues like that for anyone who looks. Men with notebooks look. They learn the footsteps of the street. They learn that the mail carrier hums on Wednesdays and not on Mondays. They learn that the kid with the milk crate counts slow when he is worried and fast when he is not. They learn that the radio in the club favors horns in the afternoon. They learn the difference between a nod that says hello and a nod that says sit down. They record everything, the way rain records itself on a window. Inside the club, Tony sits at the nicked corner of the table. He smokes with the consent of the room, not the insistence of habit. He listens, and his listening is a form of weather. Around him talk circulates. The driver admits he has learned to love red lights. The bookkeeper remarks that neat handwriting is a kind of prayer. The baker offers a story about a neighborhood in the Bronx where time runs 5 minutes late on purpose so people remember to breathe. The men laugh softly. A young runner arrives with unspent energy in his shoulders. He has news of a visitor who asks careful questions with careless eyes. The runner says the man claimed to be doing a survey about neighborhood satisfaction. The runner says the question drifted from satisfaction to schedules. Tony nods. He says the city is full of surveys. He says people who truly care about satisfaction know to ask about bread and boilers first. He tells the runner to be polite, to be generous, and to remember that silence is also speech. For the men across town, silence is a shape. It is the outline around the words they capture. They collect times, places, names that are not said but implied, appointments that are not written but kept. They build a picture made of edges and shadows. They intend to present that picture Tunday under bright lights where shadows dissolve. For now, they label boxes and set them on shelves. They wait. In the afternoon, Tony takes a walk with a man named Lou who sells hardware and advice. Lou complains that the city is replacing street signs faster than it replaces potholes. Tony smiles and says the city is a teenager sometimes. It loves to change clothes more than it loves to clean its room. Lou laughs and shows Tony a new lock that is impossible to pick, then admits a good laugh and a bad key will still open most doors. They part with warm hands and light hearts. Another block, another day, a van across the way lets a different driver sip a different coffee. The drivers change, but the cup does not. Routine is a performance. The actors rotate, the script stays put. A man on the second floor practices stillness behind a curtain that used to be brighter. He has become good at stillness. He mistakes stillness for invisibility. The city does not make that mistake. The city always sees. Back at the club, a small repair is underway. The ceiling fan stutters on one blade, like a dancer with a pebble in her shoe. The repairman is a friend of a friend, which is the same thing as a cousin. He climbs a short ladder and listens for the tiny language of screws. Tony holds the ladder and makes quiet talk about the weather again. Weather is not filler. Weather is permission. It tells a person that what they feel is real and shared. The repairman nods, tightens a screw that needed only a quarter turn, and comes down smiling. Federal Patience notices ladders too. It notices which doors open for which repairmen. It notices that a ladder appears on a day when a certain person is in town, and that the next day the ladder disappears, and so does a problem. The notes in the notebook do not call this kindness. The notes call it correlation. The notes are not unkind, they are simply designed to be literal. At dusk, the club settles into its evening shape. The radio finds a station that treats trumpets like polite guests. Coffee deepens into itself. The hat finds its hook. The men take seats that have learned their weight. Conversation turns toward the idea of larger tables elsewhere. Someone mentions a meeting downtown that was meant to be quiet and turned out to be loud. Someone else mentions names that carry weight across river and borough. No one speaks these things as if they were spells. They speak them like weather again. It may rain, it may not, bring an umbrella anyway. Across town, the men with tapes lean forward. Here is the flavor they want, here is the smoke they hope will lead them to fire. But the talk bends away at the last moment, like a branch that refuses to be a ladder. Tony says that people love to imagine councils and committees and grand tables in grand rooms. He says the reality is simpler. The reality is 100 small tables where men try to keep their promises to blocks that raised them. He says if there is a grand table, it is the city itself, and the city likes to laugh at plans. Later that week, a rumor clouds the block. It says that new ears are in the walls of certain rooms, that microphones have learned to be thin as cobwebs and dust as patient. It says that wires have found their way behind plaster that thought itself safe. The rumor is not a scream, it is a whisper that grows a little each time it is told. The club hears it. The club does not argue with it. The club adjusts. Fewer men in the room at any one time, more walks taken with no need to arrive anywhere, shorter phone calls that begin with talk of the Yankees and end with talk of light bulbs, a list of deliveries that reads like a poem about soup and bread and laundry soap. The bookkeeper smiles to himself and writes neater than ever. He fits entire afternoons into 6 lines that an outside reader would mistake for grocery shopping. He is right to do so. The real work of a block often does resemble grocery shopping. The young runner learns a new rule. He learns to count to 20 before answering questions from strangers. By the time he reaches 20, he has usually remembered the difference between curiosity and fishing. He discovers that it is not rude to be careful. It is not paranoid to be precise. The men encourage him. They tell him that a street education is a series of small improvements. You sand down the edges of your impatience. You varnish the surface of your manners. You install hinges on your temper. Tony talks more about order now, less about reach. Reach is a romantic word. Order is a parental word. He prefers the parental word. He says order means the old can sleep and the young can dream. He says reach is how people fall from ladders. The men nod, not because they are afraid to disagree, but because they have learned that most disasters are simply reach by another name. One afternoon, a man from downtown visits with a careful hat and a careful smile. He compliments the coffee and the patience. He suggests a schedule that would be favorable to all parties, with a stake in a certain warehouse that used to be a dance hall. Tony listens. He asks about truck routes and people who live upstairs, and a dog known for barking at the wrong time. The visitor blinks at the mention of the dog. He has not thought about the dog. Tony smiles and taps the ash from his cigar. He says the dog is the schedule. If you do not know when the dog sleeps, you do not know anything. The man from downtown laughs as if he understands. Perhaps he does, perhaps he does not. He leaves with a map drawn in words, a map that favors quiet streets and early hours, and the kindness of leaving sleeping dogs to their dreams. Across town a note is made. It says the man from downtown left at such and such a time. It says he carried nothing in, it says he carried nothing out. It says his smile was careful. Into the evening the city gathers itself for another night of performance. Theatre lights come on, kitchen lights follow. In a small room not far from the club, a machine warms and whirs and waits to be fed with magnetic tape. Wires hum at a frequency only cats can hear. A clerk labels a box with neat block letters. The letters are so neat they seem to apologize for what they mean. At the club, an older man named Richie tells a story about a day he sold newspapers on a corner where everyone argued about sports, but bought paper for the crossword. He says a crossword teaches you that every blank wants only one letter, and if you force a different letter you ruin the whole puzzle. Tony says a block is a crossword too. Use the right letters and the whole thing sings. Use the wrong letters, and even the good words stop making sense. The listening city hears that line too, but it does not know how to translate it. It can write it down, it can replay it, it cannot place it into a statute. That is the distance between a neighborhood and a file. One lives in skin and pavement. The other lives in boxes and labels. Both, in their way, are true. As the season inches forward, more faces with new shoes appear at the edges of the block. They are learning the dance steps. Their turns grow smoother, their pauses grow more natural. They are very proud of their pauses. The men in the room notice and decide to shorten the music. Meetings end a breath sooner. Pleasantries last a breath longer. The effect is gentle and frustrating to those who hope for sharp edges. A letter arrives for a woman on 116th Street. It says her rent will hold steady through the winter. No explanation, no request. Only a line that says thank you for being a good neighbor. She wipes her eyes with the edge of her apron and decides to make 2 extra trays of cookies at Christmas. She never knows where to send the cookies, so she gives them to the church and says give them to the right people. The priest says he knows the right people. He always does. Across downtown, a meeting has more chairs than usual. A wall map shows as many pins as a porcupine shows quills. Names sit on a long table, connected with lines that look persuasive to the eye that wishes to be persuaded. Words like structure and enterprise and association float through the air. The men in suits speak in careful phrases that have been sanded smooth by years of practice. They believe they are closing in on a truth that can stand under bright lights. They might be right. They might be early. News reaches the block in whispers that do not gossip. The whispers suggest that a grand case is being built, one that uses the logic of habit as its foundation. It will say that a man who sits in a chair and listens is the same as a man who stands and commands. It will say that a room can be a headquarters even if it looks like a living room. It will say that a nod is a memo. It will say that kindness is leverage in softer shoes. The men hear this and do not argue with strangers who are not in the room. They tighten the screws on their own routine. They check the hinges of their posture. Tony takes a longer walk than usual and ends at a bench that remembers generations of conversations. He sits and watches the city go by. He thinks about the difference between being a leader and being a symbol. A leader makes decisions. A symbol attracts conclusions. He prefers decisions. He knows symbols are useful to people who need to draw lines on maps. He will not fight over the word. He returns to the work. He steps into the club, and the room greets him with a warmth that belongs to families and well-tuned instruments. The bookkeeper nods at a ledger that now looks more like a diary of polite errands than any other kind of book. The driver mentions a new route that is slower and safer and feels like the right speed for a city that has begun to stare. The runner reports a new face with unearned confidence. Tony thanks him and says the earth is filled with new faces and we must be patient with them all. The radio, as if sensing the room, lowers its volume without being asked. This is the moment when the listening city and the living block are closest to each other. One listens with technology, the other listens with heart. One seeks a pattern that can be proven, the other seeks a peace that can be lived. In the narrow space where those goals overlap, you find the reason neighborhoods survive even the heaviest weather. Later that night, the van 2 corners away pulls off without drama. The driver finishes his coffee and tosses the cup into a small trash bag with admirable neatness. He will be replaced by another driver tomorrow. The tape in the downtown machine finishes a reel and spins softly to a stop. A clerk puts a label on the new box. In the club, Tony stands, taps his cigar and announces a rule as old as markets and stoops. Simple and steady. We do not change recipes for guests who only plan to visit once. The men nod. The room nods. The lesson slides into the bones of the block like a winter coat that fits. Before closing, a phone rings in a back room. The ring is humble. A man answers and talks about a shipment of light bulbs and whether the box should go to the back entrance or the front. He says front is friendlier, back is shorter, both are fine. He says he will leave a note for the super. He says thank you by name. The listening city captures every syllable and finds no law in them. The living block captures the tone and finds a law of its own. The door opens to the night. The street is a mirror that has learned to keep secrets by reflecting only what needs reflecting. A cat walks the curb like a tightrope artist on a lunch break. A bus exhales and continues. A man with a ladder on his shoulder moves like a human metronome. Tony watches it all and feels the old lesson rising again. The city is a partner who never signs a contract. You keep your end anyway. He looks toward downtown in his mind and sees the larger table that people like to imagine. Maybe it exists. Maybe it is simply an idea kept alive by those who need shapes for their stories. Either way, the weather is changing. Either way, the ears are closer. Either way, the block will answer with what it always answers with: predictability. Clean floors, exact change, bread for widows, light for stairwells, a quiet laugh for people who most need to laugh. Inside, chairs make their final scrape. The radio kisses the air with one last muted trumpet, and then rests. The hat returns to its hook, or to a head that wears it like a promise. The ledger closes like a book that still has chapters to live. Tony takes the last look around that a steward always takes. He says the words he likes for nights like this. Keep it simple. Keep it steady. And if the wind has new ears, let it listen to our good manners. On the sidewalk, he stands still and lets the air tell him everything it knows. He hears children settling, a television soft as a lullaby, a neighbor humming to a pot that refuses to boil faster just because someone is tired. He hears the tiny mechanical heart of the city beneath his feet, a rhythm that belongs to trains and water and history. He nods to it as if it were an old friend. It is. He walks to the corner and stops before the curb as if the street itself has asked for a handshake. Up the block, light blinks once and then steadies. The van is gone. The night has decided to pretend it is only night. Tony smiles and returns the favor by pretending that he is only a man walking home to a warm room and a chair that remembers him. In a way, that is the truth. In another way, the truth is larger. The listening city has chosen its song. The living block hums its own. The two melodies will meet soon. For now, the harmony holds. The club sleeps, the tapes cool, the map pins wait. The block breathes. The man in the hat turns his collar and disappears into the gentle dark of a city that is trying to understand itself. Chapter 4. Partners and Shadows. Morning opens like a window on East 115th Street. Steam drifts up from the grates and the bakery sends out a warm promise. The club door is shut a little longer than usual, the way a careful person keeps a hand on a teapot to feel the pressure inside. Chairs wait. The table with the nick in the corner waits. The radio waits for a finger to find the station with horns that sound like a grin. Anthony Salerno arrives in a coat that has learned his shape. He places his hat on the hook with the economy of a man who likes to make a good move instead of many fast ones. He touches the nicked corner with two knuckles, a habit the room knows by heart. Then he sits. The cigar rests near his hand like a small lighthouse. Calm gathers in the space the way dust gathers on an unused piano, soft and inevitable. Not long after, Vincent Caffaro steps in. He is a quiet wind at first glance, medium height, the face of a man who has carried both messages and groceries for elders, a walk that avoids squeaky boards. He greets the room with a nod that fits perfectly between respect and ease. To downtown he will someday be known by stricter names. To this room he is just Vinny, the man who knows the calendar. Vinny moves like a metronome set a little slower than the city. He can fit a week into a pocket. He can fold a complication until it looks like a simple list of errands. He pours coffee for the men before they remember they wanted it. He sits at angles that let him see both door and back room without turning his head. The room rests easier when he is here. Even the radio seems to find the right station faster. If Tony is the rhythm, Vinny is the note that makes a chord feel complete. He knows who needs a kind word and who needs a quiet frown. He knows that a vendor on one corner prefers his bills crisp because it makes him feel like the world is organized. He knows that a widow on 116th Street keeps her rent receipt on the second shelf under a blue jar, so when she misplaces it, he can retrieve it without fuss. He collects these details not because they are ammunition, but because they are the language of stewardship. On a gentle afternoon, the two men sit a little apart from the rest of the room. No hush falls. They are not made of drama. They talk like people comparing shopping lists. Tony asks about the week, the repairs, the deliveries, the favors that are really just neighborly chores. Vinny answers with a few sentences that cover 100 small movements. The church boiler glows again. The barber got a part for the chair that squeaked. The fruit man will have melons by Friday, but not before, so remind the woman from the second floor who is planning a dessert. Vinny keeps a small notebook but uses it rarely. He prefers to keep things in a memory sorted by street and smell. If he writes at all, it is a single line that looks like nothing to a stranger. It might say 2 hats Thursday. The room knows that means 2 men with the same first name need to be kept on different schedules so they do not see each other in a doorway and create needless talk. He does not raise his voice. He conserves it. He speaks in a register that feels like a back booth. When he laughs, it is the laugh of a man who enjoys a joke without showing it too much, as if laughter is a resource to be used wisely. He listens to Tony the way a ship listens to the harbour bell. Steady. with gratitude, with an eye of fog that may roll in without invitation. In the early afternoon, a man with downtown polish arrives, cautious and polite. He brings a message that does not want to be called a message. He says that a warehouse downriver has begun to attract attention from people who confuse curiosity with responsibility. He says schedules need adjusting to keep the peace. Tony accepts this without making a ceremony out of it. He turns to Vinny and asks about the dog that lives upstairs from the side door. Vinny says the dog naps after the mail comes. Good, says Tony, that is the hour. It is like watching two craftsmen measure a board without speaking. One holds the end, one marks the cut. The saw will hum later. For now, the plan is simply a plan. The visitor leaves with a lighter step than he had when he walked in, because there are people who know how to carry weight that does not belong on his shoulders. Vinny was not born to the role, he learned it one errand at a time. As a young man, he stood outside the club in winter with hands tucked under his arms and found that a man can learn patience by counting the breaths between bus sighs. He learned which voices carry lies like perfume and which carry truth like coffee. He discovered that the easiest way to know a person is to see how they treat a list of small promises. He became good at keeping promises on behalf of a room that tries to keep its own rhythm. He knows where the pens are. He knows which chair wobbles and how to tuck a folded matchbook under leg to make it honest again. He knows that the bookkeeper writes better in the morning and that the driver makes fewer mistakes after he has eaten something sweet. He makes sure the baker leaves a box tied with string on days when news is heavier than usual, because sugar is a lever that lifts a mood without leaving fingerprints. The young runner with the tight cap watches Vinny the way an apprentice watches a locksmith. He sees that the power is not in a raised voice or a big body, but in small accuracies repeated without fail. He notices that Vinny hears footsteps and identifies them by tempo. He notices that Vinny can tell the difference between worry and haste. He notices that Vinny does not shy away from cleaning up someone else's small mess if it will keep a bigger mess from being born. On a day that smells like rain, Tony and Vinny take a slow walk up to 116th Street. They stop to greet a woman who waters her geraniums with the kind of care a conductor shows a violin section. They ask about the boiler, they ask about her knees, they ask about her nephew's search for work. Vinny makes a small note in his head about the nephew. Afternoon hours, work that does not break the back. A boss who understands that a man can be honest without being loud. By the end of the week, the nephew will have a broom in his hand and a key to a back door. The city listens to these walks too, not with the warmth of neighbours, but with the measured attention of people who hope to build a clean story from a lot of small steps. Files grow, tapes hum, names move across boards like chess pieces that do not know what game they are in. If Tony is a face that photographs well, Vinny is a signature that looks like good penmanship. Both attract attention now. In the club, an afternoon turns into a lesson on posture. A visitor with a silver tie tries to speed the room. He wants answers that come with a calendar attached and a promise that sounds like thunder. Vinny smiles in a way that removes the urgency from the air. He says the city is a river and a dam at once. Push too hard and it spills over your shoes, wait long enough and it gives you everything it was always going to give you anyway. The visitor tilts his head, thinking this over. Tony says move with the water. The conversation becomes simple. There are days when Vinny is a shadow and days when he is a partner. The difference is not visible to the untrained eyes. On shadow days, he arranges chairs and calendars so that men who should not meet do not meet, and men who must meet find each other without creating talk. On partner days, he sits at the nicked corner with Tony and helps weigh a choice that has more than one right answer. He always prefers the answer that lets the block sleep. If the choice offers a little less money and a little more calm, he votes for calm. Calm pays interest. Late in the season, a rumour wanders in wearing its best manners. It says that meetings downtown have become heavier, not just with talk but with names that reach across boroughs and rivers. It says that the word commission is no longer an idea traded over coffee, but a word that travels on paper with lines connecting it to other words. The men in the room do not gasp. They have seen words try to do heavy lifting before. Tony glances at Vinny. Vinny nods once and begins to shorten schedules by half an hour. He changes nothing else. That is how they work. Not with panic, with small adjustments a human heart can tolerate. Fewer chairs filled, more walks outside. Calls start with a little baseball and end with a reminder about light bulbs. The ledger looks even more like a shopping list than usual. Deliveries get names that sound like soup ingredients. A person who hates soup would miss the meaning entirely. One afternoon the bookkeeper loses his pen, and with it his cool. He is the kind of man who feels steady only when his fingers feel ink. Vinny notices the rising worry and places a pen on the table without pointing. The bookkeeper settles. Later, Vinny quietly replaces the spare pens in the drawer. Small supply lines keep a room from tipping into chaos. He guards the small lines like a man guards a spring in dry country. The young runner finds himself walking beside Vinny toward a freight elevator that knows every sigh of the building. The runner asks how to learn the work. Vinny says learn the names before you learn the numbers. Learn the birthdays. Learn which people will not let you carry their grocery bag because it insults their stubborn pride, and which people need you to carry it without asking, because asking makes them feel seen in a way that is uncomfortable. He says learn the shy dogs. They will warn you about a stranger faster than a loud dog. Vinny speaks gently about the cost of being seen. He says a leader is a person who answers questions that have no neat answer. He says a symbol is a person who attracts stories he did not write. He says a steward remembers that both are heavy jackets. He points to Tony with his chin. He says that man wears both without letting them wrinkle his posture. The runner looks at Tony with fresh understanding and feels his cap loosen a little on his head. There is a memory that belongs to these two men alone. It is a winter morning when the city was too cold to argue. A delivery went wrong by a minute and a man who did not know the block tried to solve it by making noise. Vinny arrived first, carrying nothing but his breath, and rearranged the minute into a story that made sense to everyone, even the man with the noise. Tony arrived second and made the ending gentler than anyone expected. They spoke few words. They placed a small kindness in the right place. The problem dissolved like salt in boiling water. The city did not notice. The block did. In the evenings, when the radio finds a trumpet that understands how to whisper, Tony and Vinny review the day without paper. The conversation is a braid. One strand is errands, one strand is people, one strand is weather of the federal sort. The braid holds together because they trust the same principles. Do not chase money you cannot fold. Do not raise voices for problems that belong to time. Do not let pride talk louder than caution. A week unfolds in small victories. The woman with the bad back receives a padded stool that lets her peel potatoes without pain. A driver who has been white-knuckled since a scare 2 seasons ago is quietly moved to routes with kinder corners until his hands remember that the wheel is not a weapon. A shopkeeper who feared a rent hike finds a letter in a plain envelope that says steady for winter and thanks for the clean sidewalk. These are not headlines. They are stitches. A city is kept together by stitches. Downtown builds its own kind of week. Boxes multiply, tapes gather, a map gains new strings. Names that used to live only in whispers move into neat block letters. Lines connect those names like bridges drawn by a confident child. The people in charge of the drawing believe they are showing the truth. They might be. They are certainly showing a truth. In their truth, Tony is the face of a structure. In their truth, Vinny is a hinge upon which doors turn. There comes a day when a visitor with government manners steps toward the club but does not enter. He stands across the street as if measuring the door from afar. Vinny notices first. He does not point. He drifts to the entrance and checks the lock just to feel the metal steady under his hand. Tony continues a conversation about raisins in bread. He does not look toward the window. The visitor keeps his distance and then moves along, satisfied with a measurement only he understands. The men inside make no comment. Calm is a practice, not a slogan. They practice it. A joke is told about a loaf that got too ambitious and burst its pan. The room laughs in the low register that does not travel. The bookkeeper writes less than usual and writes it more carefully. The driver falls in love with another red light. The runner stands still for a full minute before speaking and discovers, again, that silence often wins the argument. On a rain-slick night, a minor drama plays at the edge of the block. A van blocks a hydrant. A neighbor begins the kind of complaint that can grow into a story with teeth. Vinny appears between the complaint and the van like a human comma. He guides the van to a legal spot without accusation. He thanks the neighbor by name and adds a loaf from the baker as if it were a standard fine for rudeness paid in carbs. The neighbor smiles despite herself. The rain carries the moment away. Tony, watching from just inside the door, nods the nod that means well done to a man who hates applause. Vinny keeps more than schedules, he keeps temperature. He senses when a room is a degree too warm with worry and opens a window by changing the subject to baseball. He senses when a man is about to do something loud and hands him a task that requires 2 quiet hands. He senses when the block is tired of the season's longer shadows and arranges for a surprise round of pastries to arrive at 3 different doorbells with no return address. But shadows are not shy forever. A whisper arrives that men in other boroughs, men with old names and new pressures, have been discussed at tables where the air is cold with air conditioning and paper is stacked like winter firewood. The word commission is spoken with the weight of a church bell. The word enterprise walks arm in arm with it. These are not neighborhood words, they are downtown words that treat rooms like diagrams. Tony and Vinny do not bother with the diagram. They adjust posture again. The club becomes even more like a living room and even less like an office. Walks replace seats. Errands replace meetings. A list on the table right now reads like a banal poem. Light bulbs, coffee, a kettle for the lady on the second floor, a new latch for the back door at the fruit stand, a sweater for the driver who coughs. If anyone reads it later, they will call it nothing. If you live here now, you call it everything. One night Vinny lingers in the doorway after closing and watches the street like a stage after the curtain falls. He thinks about the cost of being near a man like Tony. It is not the cost the papers like to imagine. It is not glamour or doom. It is attention. It is carrying the knowledge that your errands are being counted by people who do not run errands. It is the knowledge that your jokes may be replayed and misunderstood. It is the knowledge that good intentions are not a defense in rooms where context is treated like perfume, pleasant but not admissible. He also counts the interest paid. He counts the old women who sleep better because a boiler got fixed a day earlier than it would have without a certain phone call. He counts the boys who learn that waiting is a kind of strength and that you can build a life out of showing up on time. He counts the shopkeepers who pass a quiet winter because someone wrote steady on a piece of paper and slid it under a door. He counts those things and decides the ledger still leans toward good. The men in suits will not use the word good. They will use other words with long histories. They will file papers that make straight lines out of crooked hearts. They will point to tape and call it proof. They will call a nod a signature. They will treat a room like a headquarters, because it is easier to try a room than to try a neighborhood. Vinny knows this even if he does not say it aloud. Tony knows it even if he prefers to talk about bread. A small moment crystallizes the partnership. A panicked driver arrives with a problem that seems larger than the night. Tony listens without blinking. He asks for the temperature of the problem, not the headlines. Vinny asks for the names of the bystanders, not the angles. Between the two of them, they turn a storm into a steady rain, and then into a damp sidewalk that will be dry by morning. The driver goes home understanding that loyalty is sometimes a warm towel and a chair. In quieter hours, the two men share a memory or two from before the hats and responsibilities. Tony mentions a fishing dock where patience was the only real currency. Vinny mentions a schoolyard where a slow kid learned to win by choosing the game. Both memories land in the room like gentle anchors. The men who overhear them put those anchors in their pockets, because anchors have a way of keeping you from drifting when currents grow sly. The season turns a corner. The block keeps its rhythm. Downtown keeps its notes. The gap between lived truth and written truth narrows by an inch and then widens by 2. Vinny absorbs the inch without complaint and gives back 2 inches of kindness. He keeps the calendars neat. He keeps the chairs honest. He adjusts the room temperature without touching the thermostat. He closes the door at the exact moment Night needs to be told to behave. On a Sunday morning, the bells of a nearby church ring to remind the street that there are rituals older than maps. Tony stands in the doorway and lets the sound wash the room. Vinny arrives with the keys he always carries but never flaunts. He unlocks nothing dramatic. He unlocks the ordinary. He unlocks the week that begins with bread and ends with a ledger that looks like a poem about doing right by a block. Later that day, a young man who has been walking too close to the edge asks for an audience he does not call and orders. He wants permission to be impatient. He wants a shortcut to a kind of recognition that evaporates in sunlight. Tony lets the silence answer for a while. Vinny tells a story about a winter morning when he chose to be a shadow instead of a star, and discovered that the work loves shadows because shadows get things done. The young man looks down at his hands and sees they are cleaner when he holds them still. He nods and accepts an errand that will pay in quiet. The partnership stands not because of titles, but because of a shared devotion to simple rules. Keep it simple. Keep it steady. Do not let noise write your schedule. Do not let your schedule become someone else's story. Be a steward. Let the block breathe. Fix the light, write the letter, hold the ladder, pay exact change, bring bread. Night returns with its gentle, suspicious eyes. The club shrinks to its small pulse. The radio finds a trumpet that has learned to pray. Tony picks up his hat. Vinny checks the latch. They step out into a street silvered by a thin rain. Across the way, a window holds a man who thinks stillness is the same as invisibility. He will learn otherwise. The block already knows. Tony looks at Vinny without looking. Vinny looks at Tony without looking. Partners can do that. Shadows can do that too. They walk to the corner as if the city itself had asked them to escort it for a few steps. A bus exhales. A cat tests the curb with careful paws. Somewhere downtown, a box is labelled with neat letters. Somewhere uptown, a grandmother sleeps without worrying about heat. Both things are true. Back at the club door, they pause for a last scan of the street. It is a habit they have both had for so long it feels like a blessing. Tony says the nightly benediction he prefers. Keep it simple, keep it steady. Vinny adds a line he saves for nights like this. Keep it kind. He says it softly enough that only the door hears him. The door closes, the keys click, the block fades to its soft hum. Partners and shadows melt into the night that belongs to a city trying to make sense of the stories it tells about itself. In the morning there will be steam, there will be bread, there will be a list that looks like groceries and is, in fact, a map to a peaceful day. The work will continue with quiet hands, the calendar will keep its calm. Chapter 5. The Case That Tried a Table. The air over East 115th Street has the clarity that follows a night of rain. The bakery door opens, and steam blooms outward like a polite greeting. The barber sweeps a floor that was already clean. The social club sits behind its glass with the patience of a chessboard between games. Inside, chairs wait for the weight of the usual men. The table with the nick in its corner is ready to hold elbows and coffee in the day's weather. Anthony Salerno arrives with his steady coat and his hat that understands etiquette. He stands for a moment in the doorway and listens to the quiet. It is the good kind of quiet, the kind that makes a person feel that routines are intact. He places the hat on the hook and taps the table's nicked corner with 2 knuckles as if to confirm the room is still itself. Then he sits, and the room settles around him the way a city square settles around a familiar statue. News travels in 2 languages. On the block it travels in nods and in cakes cut into careful slices. Downtown it travels in paper and in words that try to fit a neighborhood into a framework. The news this morning is mostly downtown news. It has arrived with the gravity of a storm system. The word indictment pretends to be shy, but it is not. It moves with the confidence of a marching band. Another word walks beside it and does not smile. Rico. The letters sound friendly if you do not know them. If you do know them, they sound like a long winter. In the club, nobody hurries. That is the rule. The driver takes the chair that creaks politely. The bookkeeper puts down his neat ledger and his favourite pen. The baker opens a white box tied with string and lets a dozen sweet things come up for air. The radio tries jazz and then changes its mind and settles on a station that treats trumpets like conversation partners. Tony flips a page of a newspaper without reading much of it. He looks at faces more than headlines. Headlines are a view from above, faces are the street level. He sets the paper down and reaches for coffee. The men know what is in the paper even without reading it. The city has been whispering for months about a case that is less a single story and more a collage. It is full of tapes and transcripts and charts that draw lines between boroughs, like bridges drawn by an eager child. In the simplest bedtime terms, Rico is a way of looking at a dozen small acts and calling them large act if you can tie them with a ribbon that says Enterprise. It does not care for lone wolves. It is interested in tables, in rooms, in people who seem to be a pattern even when they insist they are a routine. It is a law that believes that management wears quiet shoes and sits in the back of the room. The law nods at the idea of stewardship and then proceeds as if stewardship is simply a softer word for something else. The bookkeeper folds his hands. He says the law likes ledgers. He says ledgers are honest in the way arithmetic is honest. Tony nods and says ledgers can also be poems, if you write them right. The bookkeeper smiles because he knows what Tony means. The lists from the club look like groceries. In another room they may look like an index. Context is the country that two different languages try to claim at once. Across town a courthouse is measuring itself, straightening its tie, lining up clocks so that everybody knows what time it is. The halls smell like paper and careful shoes. There is a bench polished by a century of waiting. There are rooms where people talk in sentences that have been brushed and combed and trained to walk on a leash. A judge will sit in a high chair and make a room act like a room even when the room wants to be a street. On the block, the rumour is that the case will be large enough to cast a shadow across neighbourhoods that do not share bus routes. The word commission is in the air in a way that suggests it has left the dictionary and entered a calendar. People who never met will be said to sit at the same table. People who barely spake will be said to speak in chorus. The map has pins. The pins have strings. The strings suggest a shape. Tony listens to all of this without letting his face do much work. He understands that being known is its own kind of title. He also understands that a title can be assigned to a person regardless of whether he accepts it. He tells the room what he always tells the room: predictability, calm, exact change, help the old, respect the young, keep the music low. The young runner with the tight cap asks in a tentative voice what happens when the downtown clock tower points at your block. Tony tells a story instead of giving an answer. He talks about a winter when the river threatened to climb the banks. The men on the dock did not build a second river. They moved sandbags. They watched the water with patience, and they gave it a path that did not cross a living room. The runner nods and decides to be a sandbag. A few days later, the formalities begin. Letters arrive at doors that did not ask for mail. Names are read aloud in rooms where the air is heavy with professional manners. The papers print the names in fonts that know how to look serious. People say calendar words like arraignment and motion. The city, which always works 2 jobs, keeps going. Coffee is poured, hair is cut, rent is counted. A boy practices a jump shot with no ball. Court is its own theatre. You do not shout. You wait for your cue. You stand when told. You sit when told. You say yes, Your Honour, even when your heart wants to say let me explain this. With bread and not with charts. Tony arrives, dressed the way a man dresses for a funeral he refuses to let become a spectacle. He sits where he is told. He breathes like a person who has trained himself to make his lungs look like furniture. Jury selection is a slow dance. People are asked if they can be fair. The room wants to believe they can. The law wants to believe too, but it does not depend on belief. It depends on process. The jurors are asked if they know the names on paper. Some know the headlines, some know the faces. A few know the blocks, the stoops, the particular rhythm of East 115th Street where the bread rolls and the barber laughs. Those people do not make the final cut. The law prefers a clean page. The prosecution opens with a story told in the tidy grammar of diagrams. The theme is organization. The tone is certainty warmed by caution. The story says that a table uptown connects to a table downtown, and that both tables draw strength from a larger table that people call by a proper name. It plays tapes where voices discuss the weather and then the world in a way that suggests the weather and the world might be cousins. It holds up ledgers. It points at pins on a board. It says words like pattern and directive and structure. The defense opens with a story too. It is told in the grammar of human habit. The theme is neighborhood. The tone is skepticism wrapped in courtesy. The story says that a chair is not a throne, that a living room is not a headquarters, that a nod is sometimes just a nod while coffee cools. It says that kindness and stewardship are not masks for secret commands. They are tools to help a block age without aching too much. Some days in court move like molasses uphill. Other days move like a taxi when the light turns green and everyone wants to be first across the avenue. There are witnesses who speak as if they are stepping softly across a river in winter. There are others who speak as if they are late for dinner. Tapes are played and the room listens for meanings that are not spoken aloud. The judge keeps the clock honest. He is a man who has seen many rooms try to be louder than his gavel. They do not succeed. Outside the courthouse, the city plays its regular song. Newsstands sell papers with faces on them. Falafel carts steam like cheerful locomotives. People with no time for jury duty change trains with the concentration of athletes. Back in East Harlem, the club keeps its quiet law. Fewer chairs filled at once, more walks, shorter calls. The ledger looks like groceries. The radio prefers trumpets that play in minor keys. The case is called a commission case, a word that suggests suits and long tables and calendars set by men who never needed to rush. The word travels through headlines and dinner tables and living rooms where uncles like to pronounce it as if it were a relative. For the block, the word is weather. It cannot be argued with. It can only be met with umbrellas and good shoes. On a calm morning in court, a witness tells a story about meetings that flowered out of routine. Names are said with care. Places are named with less care, because the places are everywhere and nowhere. The room leans forward. The jurors look like people trying to read a complicated subway map. Some lean toward the idea that the map is accurate. Some lean toward the fear that all maps are a bit of a lie, even when they get you home. Tony sits without making a picture of himself. His patience is not a trick, it is a habit. He thinks of the barber chair, the fruit stand, the boiler that was fixed on 116th Street ahead of schedule. He thinks of the young runner learning to wait for 20 heartbeats before answering a stranger. He thinks of a loaf cut with a gentle hand. None of those things fit into an exhibit number. He does not mind. He is not an exhibit. He is a person in a room that prefers paper to breath. Rico is explained again for the jurors as if it were a bedtime story for adults who cannot be allowed to fall asleep. The explanation goes like this. If a man participates in a pattern that looks like a business, even when the business is not filed with the city clerk, and if that pattern enriches the participants and gives them control over how certain rivers flow, then the man can be said to be part of an enterprise. The storyteller acknowledges that enterprises like this do not hang signs in windows. That is precisely why the law is here. The defense replies with its own bedtime logic. It says that the law is trying to turn routine into conspiracy, the way a magician turns a scarf into a dove. It says that if kindness looks like leverage from far away, that is a failure of distance, not a proof of design. It says that a person can sit in a chair without being a king, can tap ash from a cigar without making a decree. The judge listens to both versions and asks both sides to keep their metaphors on a leash. The men in the club read the news sparingly. Headlines can exhaust a man faster than work. They follow the quiet rules. They decoy boredom with light humor. They remind each other to eat. They carry bread to old doors. They keep the church boiler warm. The block knows that law is an ocean and that nobody ever won a fight with an ocean. You build a seawall of small kindnesses and hope the tide has manners. A week in court can feel like 3 weeks in real life. The jurors learn a new geography. They can now pronounce street names they have never walked. They can name a handful of bars and cafes and clubs they will never enter. They are shown photographs of faces wearing the blank expressions people wear when a camera is not their idea. They are told that these faces are nodes in a web. They are told that the web is real because so many lines cross in the right places. A clerk wheels in a cart stacked with tapes. The reels hum like patient bees. A voice says, "How is the weather?" and another voice answers, "The rain will not decide." Then the voices drift toward a different topic and the room listens as if a bridge might appear out of fog. Sometimes a bridge appears, sometimes it is only more fog. The prosecutor points his finger with the politeness of a man pointing toward a distant landmark. The defense attorney shakes his head with the politeness of a man who once got lost in a park and refuses to be lost twice. Back on the block, a boiler repair is celebrated with a small loaf cut for sharing. The woman on 116th Street finds a padded stool has arrived by quiet arrangement, and her knees hurt less that evening. The driver takes new routes that love red lights. The bookkeeper practices his neatest handwriting and makes every entry look like a grocery list that cannot offend anyone. The young runner walks a bag of sugar to a kitchen at dusk and comes back with a lesson about patience written in his step. Court resumes each morning at a ritual hour. The judge climbs his steps with the reliability of a clock. Lawyers say good morning in tones that could butter bread. The gallery adjusts scarves and sits. A sketch artist uses strokes that make everyone look a little more composed than they feel. A witness sits and answers questions with the care of a man diffusing a memory. He mentions names and dates and rooms. He leaves out bread and boilers because nobody asks about bread and boilers here. Sometimes the legal world collides with the living world in small ways. A juror coughs, and every mother in the gallery silently thinks about tea with honey. A deputy gives a nod to an old man whose shoes look like they hurt. An observer drops a pen and 5 hands reach down at once. Even in a room designed to make the human feel small, the human keeps appearing. As the case stretches, the narrative tightens. The prosecution stitches together weeks and months and years until the cloth holds its own weight. The defense pulls at the seams, one by one, demonstrating that a loose thread exists here and there. The judge ensures that the pulling and stitching occur with civility. Outside, the city remains a stadium of errands. The club remains a kitchen table. The table stays level. The nick in the corner anchors elbows and a way of thinking. Near the end of the season, closing arguments arrive like 2 careful trains meeting at a station. One train is painted in official colors. It announces that the pattern is undeniable, that leadership can be practiced through silence, that calm can be a form of command, that a nod can be a contract. The other train is painted in neighborhood colors. It announces that routine will always resemble structure if you photograph it from far away, that kindness can look like leverage to a lens that does not know the smell of a bakery, that a man can be a steward without being a general. Jurors receive instructions that feel like they were written by a monk with a ruler. The language is exact. The task is heavy. They must decide whether the story of patterns outweighs the story of routines. They must decide whether a table with a nicked corner was a living room or a headquarters. They must decide the meaning of silence. They must decide whether a city's habit of running on favors is a crime when described by a stranger with neat handwriting. They retire to a room that has no windows and a pot of coffee that smells like compromise. They spread papers. They make stacks. They count votes. They talk until they are hoarse with trying to explain the weather to each other. Some think of pins and strings and lines that meet in non-face. Some think of bread cut with care and boilers warmed without fanfare. All think of their duty and how the word duty can feel both noble and cold. In East Harlem, the club practices its closing routine. Chairs kiss the undersides of tables. The radio lowers its voice and gives the night back to the street. The hat finds its hook. The driver looks out at the curb and double-checks that no car has decided to act like a shadow. The bookkeeper closes the ledger with delicate hands. The young runner stands still for 20 heartbeats and then remembers that stillness is already an answer. Tony steps to the door and takes a last breath of the room. He taps the nicked corner, a small blessing. The men drift out into the cool air. Across the blocks and bridges a courthouse light burns late. Jurors finish their day with faces that have learned the weight of being the audience and the author at once. They put on coats. They step into the hallway with the quiet of people who know that any words spoken now would be the wrong words. They exit the building in pairs and singles, crossing the plaza where the stone holds a day's worth of footsteps like a mild echo. The city meets them with a cold that is honest and unadorned. Buses hiss. Taxis blink. A food cart coughs out one last breath of cumin and heat. The jurors pull their collars up and move into the evening. They will return. They will bring a verdict shaped by the story they chose to believe. Back uptown, Tony watches the wind test a newspaper against a lamppost. He considers the strange fact that a life can be two stories at once. In Nen, he is a steward of a block who loves order and quiet and the math of exact change. In another, he is a piece on a board in a game that prefers diagrams to geraniums. He cannot control which story is told louder. He can only keep his own schedule. He can only send bread where bread is needed. He can only speak in the tone that lets a neighborhood sleep. He turns his collar up and begins to walk. The city makes its evening sounds, neither friendly nor hostile, merely itself. 5 lights in 5 windows brighten all at once, as if on a cue only they could hear. A cat makes a decision and crosses the street. Somewhere a child laughs in a way that makes the night kinder. The block breathes. The hat holds steady. Tomorrow, and then the next day, and then the next, the courthouse will wait for the jurors to finish their work. The club will wait for the men to take their chairs. The radio will wait for a trumpet that understands restraint. The bakery will cut new slices. The barber will sweep the already clean floor. And the city will do what it always does. It will hold both stories at once and ask the people who live inside them to keep walking in a straight line. Under a pale moon that does not care for diagrams, the jurors fan into the night air with their coats tight and their eyes on their own sidewalks. A few look up at the tall buildings as if the buildings might offer advice. The buildings say nothing, which is the only honest thing they can say. The cold is clean, and the plaza is wide, and the taxis make their little signals. No music plays. The shoes do. Chapter 6. Pretrial Storms and Higher Courts. Dawn walks over East 115th Street with a librarian's hush. The bakery eases open, the barber checks his mirror, and the social club waits behind its glass the way a calm teacher waits for a class to settle. Inside, the chairs are lined like good soldiers, though nobody here likes the word. On the table, the nick in the corner still holds its place in the map of the room. Anthony Salerno steps in, places his hat on the hook, and taps the nick with 2 knuckles. The gesture is a pulse check. The room answers with quiet warmth. Storms come in different shapes. Some wear sirens, some wear suits. This wears a question that belongs to courthouses. It asks whether a man can be kept in a cell not because of what he has been proven to have done, but because of what a court fears he might do if he walks free before the trial begins. The city gives that question a name with a hard center and a soft edge. Pre-trial detention. The newspapers prefer other words, stronger spices, but the block tastes the same stew either way. The men arrive slow, as if pacing themselves for a long climb. The driver takes the creaking chair and smiles at it as if they share a joke. The bookkeeper sets down his neat ledger. The baker opens a white box tied with string and lets out a breath that smells like sugar and relief. The radio finds a station that treats trumpets with respect. Tony listens to the room and to the distance beyond the room. Paper is moving downtown, fast but tidy. Requests have been filed, arguments are queued. Somewhere a lawyer smooths a tie and prepares to say that liberty is not a luxury, that it is the default setting, and that taking it away before a verdict should be a last resort sharpened by real proof. Somewhere another lawyer rehearses a different melody. He will say that safety is a duty, that community peace is a right too, and that judges may ask some people to wait behind heavy doors while a larger question is answered. The young runner with the tight cap asks the room what it means in plain language. The bookkeeper answers first. He says the law is deciding whether a forecast can hold a man. Tony adds a sentence that feels like a blanket. He says the law is a scale. He says people place liberty on one side and safety on the other, and pretend the scale does not shake when they touch it. Hours later, downtown, a courtroom answers to its clocks. The benches have seen every kind of nervous posture. The walls are good at listening. Lawyers speak with care. They cite cases the way a baker cites recipes: flour, water, salt, time, liberty, danger, proof, time. The judge asks careful question, the kind that land without raising dust. The issue is not the case itself. The issue is where the man will wait while the case gathers its papers and its witnesses. Back on the block, the club keeps its discipline. Fewer people in the room. More walks outside. The ledger looks even more like groceries than usual. Light bulbs, coffee, a sweater for the driver, a note to check a railing on a second floor. The radio chooses songs that make corners feel rounded. Tony hears that the first answer from the lower bench is not gentle. The request for release has been refused. The papers say the word denied, like a stamp. The reasoning is wrapped in legal phrases that say risk and danger and influence. The door that closes does not slam, but it does not apologize either. The men in the club nod to themselves. They know a closed door when they hear one. The law provides a staircase. If you do not like the floor you are on, you climb. Appeals are stairs you must climb with perfect posture. The lawyers climb. They carry briefs folded like precise origami. They carry records, transcripts, and caution. The question climbs with them. May the government keep a man because of what it thinks tomorrow might bring, when yesterday has not yet been weighed by a jury? Vinny arrives with his pocket calendar and his unhurried eyes. He was quiet yesterday. He is quiet today. He brings the steadiness of someone who understands that storms are weather, not destiny. He sits with Tony at the nicked corner. They talk about bread. They talk about the widow on 116th who needs coal and should not need to ask twice. They talk about the barber's chair that still squeaks on the slow turn. They talk in a way that allows the room to breathe. Across town, the second bench considers the same scale. The judges there carry the same burden, which is to speak in words that can be used by other judges on other days. Precedent is the word for an older lantern that lights a newer path. Some lanterns shine farther than others. The hallway between the two benches whispers with clerks and footfalls and paper. The decision is again unfriendly to liberty. The door does not open. The stairway continues upward. The highest bench in the land is not a tall mountain so much as a high table. The walls are bright and the questioner older than any case. When the matter arrives there, it arrives wearing a new suit. It is no longer just about one man and one block and one set of charges. It is about the power of a nation to keep someone waiting behind walls in the name of safety. It is about how much a forecast should weigh on the scale. It is about whether tomorrow can cuff today. Tony hears the news the way a sailor hears the tide. He does not cheer and he does not groan. He adjusts his schedule. He tells the driver to love red lights even more. He tells the bookkeeper to imagine that every list will be read by somebody who never visited East 115th Street but still believes he understands it. He tells the young runner to keep his head down and his feet steady. He tells Vinny thank you with a glance. The Supreme Court, as the papers call it, takes the case and begins to pass the words that hold nations together. The lawyers make arguments that fold the map and unfold it again. The government's lawyer says that the community has a right to sleep without fear, that some defendants are not ordinary, that the law may ask them to wait in custody if a judge is convinced by clear and convincing proof that their release would risk the peace. He says this is not punishment. He says this is regulation, a fence to keep the herd safe. The other lawyer says that fences are still fences, and fences can feel like punishment to the person forced to stand behind Dart. He says liberty is the rule and detention must be the rare exception. He says the Constitution treats freedom as the default and fear as a claim that demands careful evidence. He says a forecast should not be enough to take away a man's daylight. He uses the language of due process, which is simply the promise that government will be civil even when it is stern. The justices ask questions that cut with soft knives. They ask about words like excessive and reasonable. They ask whether a hearing is enough of a shield. They ask about the length of waiting and whether a long wait turns caution into punishment by another name. They ask about past cases where fear guided policy and whether those were good stories to read aloud in this courtroom. On the block, the rain holds off, then arrives, then leaves. The bakery keeps its faith with mornings. The barber gathers another day's careful hair. The club stays an uncluttered sanctuary. A letter is sent to a landlord whose heart has been stingy. It is written in a tone that fills the gaps between law and neighbour. The landlord softens. The letter is filed away where letters that worked always sleep. The men who keep the tapes and the charts are busy in their own building. They are less concerned with detention and more concerned with diagrams. They pump their files like bellows and hope the fire stays lit. They know that the trial on the horizon is a larger storm with many layers. This pretrial fight is just weather before weather. Still they watch the high bench, because every word spoken there is a seed that might sprout later in other soil. When the opinion arrives, it is dressed in the careful robe of the court. It says the government may hold a person before trial in certain serious cases if a judge holds a hearing and finds clear and convincing proof that no conditions of release will reasonably secure safety. It says this is not punishment, but a regulatory measure tied to future risk. It says the Constitution permits this fence. It also says process must be observed with care, with reasons on the record, with time limits that keep caution from becoming cruelty. The newspapers simplify. They call it a win for detention. They attach names to the ruling, names that will live in indexes for years. They say the case will be taught in schools and argued in later arguments. The block has no indexes. The block feels the result as a change in weather. The door stays closed for now. The timetable lengthens. The men add patience to the shopping list between coffee and light bulbs. Tony takes the news as he takes most news, with a nod that says the only way out is through. He remembers winters that required extra coal and summers that demanded taller glasses of water. He tells the room what he always tells the room. Keep it simple. Keep it steady. Do not let the storm choose your posture. Vinny walks the avenue and checks on the quieter threads. The widow's coal, the barber's squeak, the fruitman's new delivery schedule. He escorts worry the way a polite usher escorts late arrivals to their seats. He cannot open the high door downtown. He can open this door and that one and the other row. He can keep the air moving. He can keep the room from turning in on itself. The young runner asks whether the high bench knows the smell of East 115th Street. Tony answers that the high bench does not need to know the smell. It needs to know the words. Its job is to keep the words strong enough to shelter everyone, even when the shelter feels cold. He says the block will keep smelling like bread and coffee and wool anyway. He says that is their part. Days turn into a calendar that clicks forward without asking anybody's permission. The lawyers return to the lower bench with the new rules in their pockets. Hearings are held that speak the language of the high opinion. Evidence is presented, not about what has already happened, but about the likelihood of tomorrow's mischief. People swear to tell the truth about probabilities, which is a strange oath. Judges decide. Doors open for some, doors remain closed for others. Tony's door stays closed. The reasons are listed in paragraphs that sound like ledgers. Influence, risk, no set of conditions, community safety. The words are tidy and heavy. The block reads them and stares out the window. Then it returns to work. The barber sweeps. The bakery wraps pastry in white paper. The club keeps its small flame alive even when the man with the hat is not there to tap the nicked corner. People visit him on the schedule the rules allow. They carry stories like vases, careful not to spill. They do not bring drama, they bring the weather. The fruitman's daughter graduated. The boiler held all winter. The driver learned a new route that treats him kind. The runner stands still for 20 heartbeats before answering strangers and finds the habit has changed him in ways he likes. Tony listens with the same patience he brought to the club. He asks for details that sound small and are not small. He asks if the old women are still getting their deliveries on time. He asks whether the landlord with the stingy heart stayed soft. He asks if the bakery is experimenting with a new rye and whether the community approves. He asks the barber about the squeak and tells him to oil the hinge again. He smiles when he hears about the padded stool for the woman who peels potatoes. He says that stool is a victory of the first order. The men who run the case do not come to see him, of course. They visit in a different way, by adding pages to files and lining up witnesses like a choir. They tell themselves that detention has helped calm the waters. They tell themselves this while they work late in rooms that smell like coffee and fluorescent light. The high ruling changes more than this one room. Across the city and across the nation, judges begin to cite the new opinion. Defense lawyers find themselves telling clients that a forecast can be a locked door. Prosecutors find themselves explaining that caution is now a coat the court may ask some people to wear before the trial. The debate moves from want courtroom to 1,000, from want name to 100. The names will change. The question will not. On East 115th Street, spring arrives the way a shy guest arrives at a party, peeking in and then committing. Children start to run again in ways that make old knees ache with nostalgia. Hydrants consider their seasonal performance and hold off for a while longer. The club opens its windows a crack. The radio finds songs that believe in sunlight. Vinny keeps the routine like a cantor keeps the tune. He meets the driver on corners that feel safe. He arranges errands that feel like errands. He keeps conversations short and friendly and full of baseball. He keeps the ledger looking like groceries. He carries a pen he never uses in honor of the bookkeeper's comfort. He receives a letter written with legal care and reads it twice, then files it in his head where he files all the pages that cannot be allowed to disturb the rate of the heartbeat. The young runner carries bread to 3 doorbells on a rainy afternoon. He does it without thinking of metaphors. He does it because the room has taught him to believe in simple duties. On the 3rd landing he pauses to look out over the block. The street looks like a river that has accepted its banks. He thinks of the high bench deciding big question, and of this small building deciding to be decent. He decides to be decent too. News articles continue to describe the larger case with diagrams and long captions. They show string and pins, they show faces without smiles, they show words like enterprise and structure. They do not show the padded stool, or the fixed hinge, or the extra coal that arrived on time, or the barber learning to oil the chair without prompting. That is not a complaint. It is a description of what news can and cannot do. One evening the barber walks into the club and holds up a small oil can like a trophy. The room applauds without noise. The bookkeeper reads a line from the ledger that looks like nothing and means a great deal. The baker leaves a new box with a different string, an unnecessary flourish that pleases everyone anyway. The radio picks a trumpet that learned optimism in a hard school. Later, a visitor returns from seeing Tony and repeats his favorite line to the room. For comfort. Keep it simple. Keep it steady. The words land like birds on a long railing. The room holds them gently and lets them speak for themselves. The higher courts have spoken, the lower courts adjust. The days continue, the night continues. The neighborhood does what neighborhoods do when the weather is larger than any house. It tightens its ties and counts its elders. It teaches its kids to wait for 20 heartbeats. It learns to love red lights. It leaves exact change and writes polite letters and sweeps stoops and waters geraniums. It keeps its promise to itself. As summer leans closer, the trial calendar grows heavy with names and exhibits. Lawyers practice questions in mirrors. Clerks stack pages that look like snowdrifts. Reporters rehearse introductions that will make sense to people who have never smelled this block. The listening city sharpens its pencils. The living block sharpens its kindness. On a warm night, Vinny and the runner stand near the doorway and listen to the hum of the street. The runner asks whether the high decision will be remembered the way people remember songs. Vinny says yes. He says some decisions are melodies that outlive their first dance. He says it will be sung in classrooms and courtrooms for years. He says their job is simpler. Keep the rhythm, keep the tempo, play the small notes clean. The moon rises like a white coin and then decides to be a moon instead. A bus exhales, a cat accepts a compliment from a stranger and walks on. The block rests. The papers wait for morning. The club closes with its neat rituals, and even with one chair empty, the room feels whole, because the rules that hold it together were never tied to one body. They were tied to the idea that a neighborhood is a promise. In a cell lit by patient light, Tony rests with his back straight and his thoughts arranged like a well-kept drawer. He remembers rivers and docks and bread and boilers. He remembers faces with names and names with birthdays. He does not argue with the high bench in his head. He does not flatter it either. He accepts that words rule worlds, and he keeps his own words short and serviceable, simple, steady. Morning will come, as it always does, and bring with it court dates and errands, headlines and haircuts, law and life. The question of detention has been answered for now. The larger question wait their turn. The men of the club will meet them as they meet everything, with exact change, with clean floors, with bread in a white box tied with string, with the patience to make a city breathe through its nose. Chapter 7. Verdicts and Years Counted Out. The courthouse wakes earlier than the block. Stone warms slowly, and the flags above the plaza hold their breath before the first wind of the day remembers its job. Down on East 115th Street, the bakery opens and releases a respectful steam, as if whispering good luck to anyone facing a judge. This morning the barber sweeps twice. The club keeps its steady pulse, chairs tucked like polite hands. The nicked table corner ready for elbows that will not be there today. The trial has walked a long road. It has eaten months in careful bites. It has turned tapes into transcripts and faces into names on charts. It has asked a jury to learn a new dialect, the dialect of patience and proof. Today that jury carries a sealed envelope like a fragile egg. No one rushes them. Everyone rushes around them. This is how important days move, with calm in the middle and noise at the edges. In the block's living rooms, televisions hum at polite volume. In cafes, headlines grow a spine. People who have never visited the courtroom know that today is a day for verdicts. They speak softer. They make room for each other on the sidewalk. They carry their bags like citizens of a city that is both theatre and audience. Inside the courthouse, the woodwork keeps its old smell. The bailiff knows every hinge by sound. The judge settles into his chair with the stillness of a captain who has steered rough water. The defense table is a study in posture. The prosecution table is a study in stacked paper. The jury enters like weather that has already decided. 12 quiet faces, 12 steady steps. 12 hearts that have carried a secret across a lunch hour that lasted a lifetime. They sit. The room stands. The room sits. A clerk reads the preface to a moment. The judge asks the right question in a voice that refuses drama. The foreperson rises with a measured breath. Words are spoken that will grow into headlines before sundown. They are simple words. Guilty. Not guilty. Guilty again. The syllables are short and heavy. They fall on the room like coins on a small table. No one reaches to pick them up. In the gallery, pencils move. In the back, a man closes his eyes and opens them again as if he just remembered a face from childhood and needs to verify it is real. Lawyers keep their expressions under glass and old tradition. They will step into elevators later and exhale like divers returning to daylight. For now they are furniture with pulse. On East 115th Street, the news takes a minute longer to arrive. A delivery truck turns the corner. 2 kids argue about which team owns summer. An old woman tests the steps with her cane and smiles, because the railing does not wobble anymore. In the club, a radio stays low, then lower, then clicks off. The room understands that silence carries news faster than static today. For the jury, the verdict is the end of a map they were given months ago. For the block, it is a change of weather that will last a season. For Tony, receiving updates under careful rules and guarded windows, It is another proof that a person can be two stories at once. The papers will speak of leadership and structure. The block will remember bread and boilers. Both stories are true from certain distances. Sentencing waits like winter at the edge of fall. It will arrive with numbers that weigh more than numbers usually do. Years will be counted not like birthdays, but like bricks in a wall. The judge will speak gently, because gentleness can be stern when backed by law. He will outline the reasons the law keeps in a locked drawer. He will stack the reasons until they look unshakable. He will name a span of years and place them upon a life the way a mason lays stone. Reporters will write that the city has sent a message. The city will shrug, because the city never stops sending messages. It sends them through rent receipts and bus routes and laundry lines and careful nods on stoops. It sends them through verdicts too. It is a chorus that never rests. The men at the club absorb the day like men in a small boat absorb a wave. Knees bend, hands hold, the boat rides it out. Light humour is rationed but not banned. The bookkeeper says that coffee tastes braver when the cup is thin. The driver replies that red lights look wiser on days like this. The baker leaves a white box tied with string and does not stay to chat. Sugar is a note you play and leave ringing. Vinny keeps the calendar even when the calendar bites. He knows which errands can still be run, which doors must stay shut, which greetings should be delivered with a quieter tone. He reminds the young runner to count to 20 before answering anybody who smells like a notebook. He reminds everyone that kindness must not retreat just because the weather is unfriendly. Across the river, the courthouse resumes its machine rhythm. There are forms to sign. There are motions to preserve. There are appeals that spring up like stubborn grass in cracked concrete. The defense calculates. The prosecution files. The judge closes the book on this day and opens another book labeled tomorrow. Courts are factories for tomorrow. When sentencing finally arrives, it does not wear surprise. The judge names years that sound like geography rather than arithmetic. 100 is a continent. Decades are mountain ranges. Lesser counts stack beneath like foothills. The numbers do not shout. They hum with the power of a generator that will not be turned off for a long time. The room listens. Some hearts break. Some spines straighten. Some pens record history with a hand that shakes, even when the writer pretends it does not. The judge explains the why. He speaks of patterns and harm measured in quiet ways. He speaks of influence, of direction by silence, of peace purchased with fear. He speaks of the public trust the court is required to guard. He acknowledges the difference between legend and proof, and claims to keep his feet only on proof. He ends with the customary wish that citizens never see this room again in this posture. Wishes are free, years are not. After, the city exhales in a dozen dialects. On television, analysts return to phrases they have rehearsed. On sidewalks, people shake their heads in ways that mean I have a lot to say and will say none of it out loud. In kitchens, a pot of sauce simmers a little longer, while someone stares at the window and sees seasons moving across the glass. For the block, the immediate future is practical. Who takes which errands? Who checks on which elders? Who carries the ledger with the grocery handwriting? Who keeps the barber's chair oiled? Who remembers the padded stool for the lady who peels potatoes? The story with capital letters can wait for the late news. The lowercase story needs to start dinner. Vinny sets up a simple relay. The driver runs shorter routes at slower speed. The runner graduates to trusted errands that require a quiet face. The bookkeeper teaches a cousin how to write lists that look like soup ingredients. A friend of a friend repairs a door latch with the kind of care that marks a professional. In this way, a neighborhood holds its shape after a verdict tried to reshape it. Letters arrive where they are permitted to arrive. They carry blessings without drama. The bread is good. The barber laughs. The widow is warm. The fruit man stockpiles summer in jars and thinks of selling them in winter. The church boiler thanks you by not failing during the cold snap. The runner has learned to wait for 20 heartbeats and now waits for 30 on bad days. He smiles more. He understands his own feet. Tony receives these small weather reports with the care of a gardener reading notes from a yard he cannot visit. He asks the questions he always asks. Are the elders sleeping? Is the block breathing? Has anyone made the sauce too salty and pretended it was on purpose? He does not embellish the day with larger principle. He holds to his 2 words: simple, steady. The papers will write that the era turned a page. Perhaps it did. Pages turn whether we like the chapter or not, but the block knows that an era is not a page. It is a long hallway of small acts, a rent eased, a railing tightened, a loaf split clean, a kid told to slow down and then thanked when he does. Those acts are the hallway lights. You keep them on. Still, the verdict changes more than a schedule. It changes how the city imagines itself. It convinces people who love lines and charts that their lines and charts can win against habits and hearts. It convinces people who love habits and hearts that they must be tidier than ever when they move through rooms watched by strangers. Everyone edits themselves a little. Even the block walks with its collar turned up. This is not fear. It is caution dressed as manners. The commission language, the grand table, the long strings between pins, all of it becomes a signature under which many stories will be filed. Other names appear in print. Other faces age under fluorescent light. The chorus of new cases hums along the courthouse corridor. For a while you cannot walk that corridor without hearing the old verdict in the background, the way you always hear a river somewhere in the city if you listen long enough. Meanwhile, people keep living. The barber gives a free cut to a kid who lost a father figure to faraway walls. The bakery wraps a loaf in extra paper against the drizzle. A teacher at a nearby school decides to offer a class on neighborhood history that tells the gentler story too. The priest learns a new joke for funerals because sorrow deserves a smile at the door. Vinny sits with the runner at the nicked corner one evening and says the part he does not often say out loud. A verdict can make you smaller if you let it, he tells the kid, or it can make you cleaner. Cleaner is not louder, cleaner is not braver. Cleaner is simply more deliberate with your hands and your words. The runner nods and studies his knuckles like they are a set of tools he is going to learn to use correctly. The driver adopts a ritual. He parks for a minute near the church after his last route and listens to the bell count the hour. Counting hours, he decides, is no enemy of hope. He tells himself that a man who can love a red light can love a bell. Both teach patience, both keep you from rushing into silly trouble. He tells the bookkeeper this thought. The bookkeeper writes it in small letters in the margin of a page that otherwise lists coffee, light bulbs, 2 latches and a pound of sugar. The judge's words echo in the city's architecture. Agencies grow confident with pattern cases. Lawyers memorize the cadence of closing arguments that once felt new. Juries learn to decode tapes with less frustration than their older cousins did. A new normal sets its table. Plates are straight, forks gleam, nobody spills and pretends they did not. And still, under all that, the human music plays in C major. A grandmother teaches a recipe that uses onions like a patient instrument. A boy learns to lace his shoes without tearing the leather. A shopkeeper replaces a flickering bulb and feels like a magician. A couple argue about a rug, and then share a bowl of something warm and forget what the rug looked like. None of this is evidence. All of it is proof of life. On a late afternoon when clouds sit low and think deep thoughts, the club hosts a quieter crew than usual. No one pretends the verdict did not land. No one invites it to sit at the table either. They talk about baseball, and about the barber's new oil can, and about the baker's experiment with a rye that tastes like a long story. They share a memory of Tony tapping the nicked corner and telling the room to protect the rhythm. The memory sits with them and behaves like a gentleman. A man from downtown passes by the window and glances in without stopping. He sees only a room that looks like a living room. Chairs, coffee, hands. If you did not know better, he thinks, you might call it ordinary. He keeps walking, and the room returns to being precisely what it wishes to be. Ordinary with a backbone. When night comes, it does not arrive with brass bands or grim drums. It arrives like it always does. A bus sighs. A cat makes a decision. A streetlight blinks and then behaves. The club closes with its rituals. The hat hook holds its empty promise. The ledger sleeps with a ribbon in it. The radio chooses a trumpet that knows how to say goodnight without pretending goodnight is the end of anything. There is a quiet walk that belongs to this chapter. It is the walk many people take from a courthouse to the sidewalk that is not theirs. to a taxi that is anyone's, to a block that does not know their name. It is also the walk back to East 115th Street by those who remain, those who will do ordinary work under extraordinary attention. The walk is the same length for both, the meaning is different. The city keeps two ledgers. One, the law can read, one only the block can read. In the legal ledger, today is a victory for a theory of order that tries to hold chaos by the lapels. In the block's ledger, today is a heavy page that will be followed by a lighter page if the people who live here decide to be stubborn about kindness. Both ledgers will be consulted in years to come. Each will claim to tell the truer truth. Each will be partly right. In the seasons that follow, the verdict will be an address. Other cases forward their mail to. It will share a wall with other names. It will be footnoted in books and said aloud in classrooms. It will appear in documentaries where the lighting is solemn and the music is careful. It will also appear in jokes told softly at kitchen tables where somebody needs to laugh at something powerful so that it shrinks enough to let the soup taste like soup again. Late in the evening, Vinny stands by the doorway and lets the night settle on his shoulders. He thinks of lessons that are not written in any book he knows. He thinks that years are not only counted out by judges, they are counted out by bakers who get up before dawn, by drivers who pull over for a bell, by bookkeepers who leave margins for tiny wisdom, by kids who learn to stand still for 30 heartbeats because it makes them better at being alive. He smiles a little, the way a man smiles when he sees that his street has not forgotten its song. Down the block, a window glows like a small lighthouse. Behind it, a woman writes a list for tomorrow. It includes milk and salt and a reminder to call her sister. She adds another line that just says, "Be generous." She does not know she has written the law of the block. She folds the list and slides it into her purse. She turns off the light. The street accepts the darkness like a gift it knows how to share. In a room many miles away, under lights that do not sleep, Tony lies awake for a minute and counts a different ledger. He counts faces, not years. He counts the fruitman's daughter, the lady with the padded stool, the barber with the oil can, the runner who learned to wait for 30 heartbeats and now sometimes counts to 40 for luck. He counts the sound of a trumpet that whispers goodnight. He allows himself the smallest smile a man can afford and still call it a smile. He closes his eyes. By morning, bread will rise again, coffee will steam again. The judge will move on to new cases. The reporters will find new phrases to polish. The block will keep its promise, protect the rhythm, pay attention, let the block breathe. The verdict will remain what it is, a heavy word on a heavy page, but the pages will keep turning, and the hands that turn them will smell like flour and oil and ink. Chapter 8. Another courtroom and the echo of old habits. Morning paints East 115th Street. With a soft brush, the bakery opens and a warm breeze of sugar slips into the block. The barber lifts his broom and makes a ritual of first sweeps. The social club behind the glass is quieter now, like a piano with the cover down. A familiar chair sits under a tired light. The table with the nicked corner holds its ground, ready to remember elbows that have not visited in a while. Tony's absence is not an empty chair. It is a temperature change. People walk a little slower past the window. The radio starts softly, as if asking permission. The ledger on the table keeps its grocery handwriting, though another hand turns its pages. Vinny carries the rhythm like a man carrying a lit candle through a long hallway. He lowers the flame when the hallway narrows. He raises it when the hallway brightens. Downtown, another courtroom rubs sleep from its eyes. Names travel from one caption to another like passengers changing trains. The air smells of paper and a patient kind of electricity. New witnesses wait on benches that have heard more secrets than any single priest or bartender. The city is trying to explain itself yet again, with diagrams and careful voices. There is a special hum in a room that expects cooperation. It is not loud. It is more like the quiet of a library where somebody has just found the right page. Men who once stood at the edge of a conversation now sit under oath. They talk in full sentences, the way unburdened people talk after a storm breaks. One of those men is Vinny Cafaro. who used to be the quiet wind inside the club and is now the steady wind inside a courtroom. He is not a man for theatre, he is a man for detail. He sits straight, breathes evenly, and answers in the same practical voice he once used to ask whether the dog upstairs was napping after the mail. He explains schedules like a clerk who loves calendars. He does not hurry. He puts a picture together piece by piece. He rescues the jury from a maze and guides them across a living room the way a good host guides a guest through a crowded party. The courtroom likes him for his patience. The gallery does not know what to do with its feelings. Cooperation is a word that can wear more than one face. To the law, it is a bridge. To the block, it can feel like weather that arrived without being invited. The barber, back on East 115th Street, sweeps and thinks about the word, and decides that words get too much credit. People are what matter. The boiler must run, the old must sleep. The young must learn how to love red lights. Vinny explains routines that the jury has only seen as headlines. He turns nodded greetings into quick lessons on how to keep a neighborhood from tripping over its own feet. He talks about timetables that never raise their voice and still manage to be obeyed. He talks about errands that look like groceries and were groceries, and how groceries are sometimes the way a city hides its deeper math. He keeps the violence drained from his sentences the way a good cook drains a pot, so the sauce will not drown the past. The prosecutor gives him questions that fit like stair steps, up and up. The defense tries for loose rugs and slippery tiles, and sometimes finds them. The judge keeps the floor honest. Through it all, Vinny keeps that windless tone, a weather report without dramatics. He is careful with pronouns. He is careful with memory. He is careful with the word always. Always is a word the law distrusts unless it wears a date. Back on the block, the club averts drama by keeping busy. The ledger notes light bulbs, coffee, a latch, a sweater, a loaf for the woman with the bad back. The driver practices a new route that favors clean corners and busier streets. The runner stands still for 30 heartbeats now, patience stretched like a new shirt that fits better each day's. The baker leaves a second box tied with string, as if to argue that sugar can be policy. A new visitor arrives afternoon in a suit with the wrong shoulders for this street. He looks through the glass like a man who reads from the end of a book. Vinny meets him at the door with the warmth of a doorman at a hotel that knows its regulars. The visitor asks about hours. The answer is simple. Fewer hours, calmer hours. The visitor nods and moves on, disappointed not to find an argument he can fold into his briefcase. In the downtown room, the echo of old habits becomes evidence. Handshakes become paragraphs. Evenings at small tables become footnotes with surprising stamina. The jury learns that quiet can be read like a ledger. They learn that nods can be annotations. They learn that a city is not only what people do, but how they do it. The defense reminds them, gently, that interpretation is not the same as truth. The defense says that a nod might be no more than a nod. It might be a neighbor's way of measuring the weather without barometers. Vinny is asked about names that stretch across the map. He speaks them without drama and then lowers his eyes to the table, as if the names are better behaved when they sit down. He describes the gravity of certain rooms, the way a place can collect people, the way a magnet collects paper clips. He does not spill secrets like coins on a counter. He lines them up and counts them and explains where the change came from. On East 115th Street, a bulletin board in the church shows a bake sale. Someone has written a simple sentence on the bottom in blue ink. Be generous. Vinny sees it one evening and smiles without showing teeth. He buys 2 paper plates of cookies and leaves the money in a jar as if leaving a tip for good weather. A young man asks Vinny a question that would have hurt his tongue a year ago. He asks what it costs to be a witness under bright lights. Vinny answers by tying his shoelace and watching the traffic. He says the cost is never paid in nice currency. He says you pay in sleep, and in time, and in people who stop trusting your silence. He says you also pay with a lighter bag on your back, and that matters to a man's spine. The young man nods and decides to hold fewer opinions about things he has not done. In the courtroom, dates and times march past like a percussion line. A chart appears that looks like a family tree drawn by a cartographer. The jury learns vocabulary they never asked to learn. They watch Vinny outline how certain calls meant a window was open or closed, how visits followed a calendar that made sense once you learned the meter. He is never cruel, he is never flashy. He gives the room what it wants, which is order, and then he gives the room what it needs, which is context. Context is the city's favorite secret. Without it, a grocery list looks like a code. With it, a code looks like a grocery list. The judge knows this and allows more context than some judges would. The jury knows this and leans forward when the witness speaks about winter mornings and why certain corners are kinder at certain hours. The lawyers know this and argue over whether kindness is a disguise or simply kindness. Back at the club, a postcard arrives without a return address. It shows a beach somewhere warmer than New York in March. On the back is written a sentence that obeys the rules of good manners. Take care of the elders. Someone pins the card to the back wall near the old photo, where sunlight will make it whisper all afternoon. The defense introduces a witness who knew Vinny when the city was younger. He paints him as a man who liked neat piles of paper and long walks and the feeling of finishing a day with every promise kept. The point lands gently. The jury sees the man again, behind the cooperation, behind the chair. A person who used to carry errands on his shoulders now carries recollection. A person who used to hold a door open now holds a timeline open for the court. Evenings uptown keep their shape. The barber tells a joke that he has been saving for a funeral but decides to test on a Tuesday. The women at the church collect coins and cookies and chatter. The runner volunteers to set up tables and discovers that the best way to avoid talking too much is to carry chairs. The driver stands beside his car and listens to church bells count the hour as if the bells were a teacher he respects. The newspaper uses phrases like ripple effect and continuing prosecutions. It lists names that once lived in the same paragraphs as Tony and Vinny and now live under different headlines. The stories emphasize strategy. The block emphasizes dinner. The city runs both stories at once and still has room for a third, the small unreported one about a latch that no longer sticks on a back door that always needed two hands. In the downtown room, a day arrives when Vinny's testimony touches a nerve that no one expected. It is not a dramatic secret. It is a simple recollection about a schedule that intersected with a holiday. The detail shows a jury how habits wrap themselves around the calendar the way ivy wraps itself around a fence. The prosecutor smiles with his eyes. The defense sips water and keeps his pencil still. The judge's face does not change. The court reporter types like rain against a window. The echo of old habits reaches other rooms. A separate case begins 2 floors away with a similar script and a slightly different cast. Another case opens across the river with a different judge, who likes to ask questions first and save rulings for dessert. In each room, a witness who learned patience in smaller rooms describes how a city used to breathe and how that breath sounded to people who recorded it for a living. Vinny goes home at night, with the careful gait of a man who knows cameras can stare even when they are not blinking. He opens his refrigerator and stares at the simple contents: eggs, bread, a wedge of cheese that looks like the moon on a kind night. He thinks about the block and about obligations that do not end when a man changes rooms. He sleeps lightly and dreams of calendars where every square is empty, and the only appointment is with a chair under a tree. In the morning he returns to the stand for a shorter round. The questions cover the gravel left behind by yesterday's trucks. He steps across, steady. He does not guess. He does not gift the room with more than it asked for. If a sentence does not improve the truth, he does not say it. When he steps down, the courtroom exhales so quietly that only the wooden rails seem to notice. The jurors take these days home like heavy coats they are not allowed to hang on just any hook. They keep their faces arranged on the subway and their hands spare of gestures. They arrive in kitchens where the news wants to ask them what they think and they say nothing, because that is what service looks like during a trial. They eat pasta. They sleep the sleep of people who are keeping a promise. Back on East 115th Street, the club leans even harder into ordinary. A boy needs a winter hat. Though winter is nearly done, a teacher asks for a spare extension cord. A light bulb dies on a landing at dusk, and the driver sprints up the stairs with one in his pocket, like a magician. The barber applauds quietly when the bulb warms to life. It is a small light. It feels like a large principle. A rumor arrives that a film crew wants to shoot on the corner. The block shrugs because cameras are only mirrors with better posture. Vinny says yes, but asks for gentle shoes and quiet voices. The crew behaves like guests at a wake. They pack up before dark and leave the corner the way they found it, with only the faintest smell of coffee blowing out of the social club door when it opens. As spring deepens, the cases downtown fold and unfold. Some settle into neat verdicts. Some require the careful explanations of juries who have learned to read the city's handwriting. Through it all, the name Cafaro sits in transcripts like a hinge. Doors swing on hinges, rooms connect. Stories that once refused to be told now insist on taking a seat. Vinny does not parade. He carries groceries for an elder and dries a dish and keeps his hat low. He sits at the nicked corner when the room is empty and taps it once with his knuckle, paying respect to a piece of wood that has listened longer than most men. He writes a line in the ledger that only he will understand. 2 hats Thursday. Then he scratches it out and writes a plainer note about coffee. Plain is safer, and in this season, safer is kinder. The runner asks about loyalty, a word that stands up straighter than most. Vinny says loyalty is not a tattoo, it is a toolbox. You open it and reach for patience, for decency, for silence when silence is a gift, and for speech when speech keeps a neighbor from harm. He says loyalty to a block means loyalty to its elders and its children, even when the adults have made a mess of the middle. The runner nods and decides to carry another loaf that day without being asked. Downtown, a prosecutor closes a file with care, and a defense lawyer opens a new one with the same care, and a judge signs an order that will live in a cabinet where labels never fade. The courthouse stands athwart the river, like a ship that has forgotten how to sail, but remembers how to hold weight. People step in and out with the seriousness of travelers who left home a long time ago and are not quite sure where they are headed. Uptown, the barber teaches a kid how to hold scissors, not as a weapon, but as a promise to be precise. The baker tries a new rye and accepts gentle feedback from women who have been buying bread longer than he has been baking it. A landlord receives a letter written with polite steel and lowers a rent that should not have been raised. The church bell counts the hour. The driver adds a minute of gratitude to his route. Vinny hears that the papers have begun to call his testimony a turning point. He has no taste for milestones, he prefers errands. He chooses to deliver a note to a small shopkeeper who needs encouragement written in simple language. Keep going. You are doing fine. He leaves it under the register where she will find it after closing and pretend she does not know who wrote it. The echo of old habits lingers in the club like the last note of a trumpet. Note everything has changed. Coffee still tastes like the first 30 minutes of a good day. Cards still shuffle without being dealt. The chair still creaks for the driver, and the driver still smiles at that creak like it belongs to a friend. The radio plays a tune that used to fill the room when Tony tapped the nicked corner. The room listens, grateful for a song that remembers the words. Even as cases conclude, the neighborhood refuses to become a case study. It remains a place where a kid can learn to carry a bag without dragging it, a place where old men argue about baseball like theologians who have misplaced their footnotes, a place where a woman writes "Be generous" on a bake sale flyer and changes the day. The city may try to turn it into a diagram again. The block will answer with bread. On a green afternoon, Vinny walks past the schoolyard and watches a boy practice free throws with invisible chalk on his fingers. The ball arcs true more often than not. The boy counts to 20 between shots because somebody told him that patience loves practice. When the boy misses, he smiles anyway. Vinny thinks that is how adults should miss too. Evening lowers itself gently over the glass of the club. The light inside leans warm. The ledger closes. The radio selects a trumpet that nods toward joy without pretending joy is easy. Vinny turns the key in the lock. He looks down the block and sees the little things that say peace without saying the word. A stroller parked safe under a stoot, a new bulb glowing on a landing, a bag of groceries tucked into the crook of an elbow that used to carry heavier burdens. Downriver the courthouse empties. The clock on the wall insists on fairness by treating every minute the same. Files are placed in cabinets. Custodians walk their patient routes. A courtroom grows quiet in a way that feels like respect. The echo of old habits settles into transcripts. They will be studied and argued and weighed. They will not carry bread or fix boilers. That is not their job. Uptown, the club does not study anything tonight. It breathes. It waits for morning, which will bring sugar steam and a barber's broom and the ordinary courage of people who believe that decency is a schedule. The echo of old habits hums a lullaby. Not a sad o, a steady o. The kind you keep hearing in your head long after the room has gone dark. Chapter 9. Health, Distance, and the Long Fade. Winter learns to speak softly inside walls. Lights hum, keys measure time in the corridor like a metronome that refuses to improvise. Day follows day with the patient logic of a long hallway. In that world the hours dress plainly. Morning arrives with a cart, noon arrives with a count, evening arrives with a door that shuts in a familiar way. Outside, East 115th Street keeps breathing in sugar and coffee and wool. Inside, life becomes a collection of small rituals that ask the body to cooperate. Anthony Salerno adapts the way a stubborn garden adapts to shade. He moves slower not because he loves slowness, but because slowness has decided to love him. He folds his clothes with the dignity of a clerk. He lines up his shoes as if they are listening. He keeps his spine straighter than comfort would prefer. He eats what a schedule tells him to eat. He learns the new geography of his hands, which reach for a rail before they reach for a thought. Health is a quiet accountant. It adds and subtracts behind a closed door, and then announces the balance without asking how you feel. The balance changes. The knees send clear messages. The breath edits itself. Sleep insists on earlier hours like a landlord with opinions. The nurses move with the rhythm of practiced kindness. Some bring a joke inside their pocket and let it out when the room needs a warmer wind. Some bring a stare that means you are still a person, even when the day wants to treat you like a file. Letters begin to carry more of the weather from the block. They are written in a careful hand that does not waste ink. The bakery is trying a new rye. The barber swears by a new oil. The driver loves red lights more than ever, and now blesses stop signs as cousins of the same patient family. The young runner stands still for 30 heartbeats, and sometimes for 40 when the wind is foolish. A widow sends thanks for coal that arrived Dundee before the cold turned rude. A priest includes a joke safe enough for all ears. Tony reads each line twice, once for the words, once for the air that clings to them. He answers with economy. Tell the baker the rye is good. Tell the barber the squeak is gone in my memory. Tell the driver to count the bells before he counts his miles. Tell the runner that patience is like bread dough. If you rush it, you get a lump. If you wait, it rises. Tell the widow she owes us nothing but a wave from her window. On good afternoons, the light in his window remembers how to be gentle. It makes a square on the floor that looks like an old tablecloth. He rests his hand in that square and thinks of the nicked corner on the table at the club. He imagines the weight of elbows, the scrape of chairs, the low trumpet from the radio, the tiny ceremony of coffee poured into a thin cup. He does not indulge in sorrow. He treats memory like a tool and uses it to keep the day square. The body negotiates each day as if it were a contract that needs renewal at breakfast. Some mornings the hands agree, some mornings the lungs ask for better terms. Nurses nod like patient clerks. A doctor explains the math of aging with a voice trained for human ears. There are tests, there are pills, there are silences that do not last long because somebody always remembers a story about a baseball game or a winter where the snow decided to be kind. Visitors arrive with regulated cheer. They sit on chairs that are honest about their design. They talk about the block without making it sound like a museum. Vinny shows up when allowed and brings the same posture he brings to every room. Calm, not for show but for use. He calls the nurses by name. He asks about the dog of a guard who thought nobody listened. He keeps the talk simple and steady. Bread, boilers, the barber, the kid who learned to wait, the church bell that counts hours like a gentle librarian's. Sometimes, when the corridor is quiet and the window has decided to be generous, Tony tells a story that sounds like a street told by a river. He speaks about a winter dock where fishermen knew the art of standing still. He speaks about a young man who mistook speed for strength and learned to love red lights. He speaks about the value of exact change. He does not speak about anger. Anger is a wasteful fuel. He prefers the kind that keeps a room warm without filling it with smoke. The calendar turns. The case that tried a table has moved into history books that smell like new glue. The city finds other pages to read. The block continues to be a block. A new boy counts coins on a crate. A new barber apprentice learns to stand with a broom until the broom learns hymns. The baker perfects the rye and admits that the secret is time. The church bell remains the church bell. The fruit man tells his daughter that work is work, and kindness is extra work you get paid for later. Tony has moved to a place designed for bodies that need more watching. A federal medical center in a distant city, quiet as a library and bright as a clinic. The hallway smells like soap and patience. The air carries the sound of wheels rolling slow to avoid the soft thunder of complaint. Nurses speak a language that mixes science and sympathy. The rooms have windows that frame the sky with rectangular manners. Springfield is a word that tastes like grass even when you cannot leave the building. He learns the new geography of these corridors. He counts the steps from bed to window, from window to chair, from chair to the place where a nurse checks his pulse with a touch that says, "I see you." He learns that breakfast sounds different in a place where hope is measured in ranges and progress is a day without new pain. He learns that silence can be kind if you let it sit next to you and share the chair. The letters follow him. So do the voices of people who have learned to write with restraint. The driver says the bell has a richer tone in spring. The barber says the new oil is a miracle and admits he might be in love with a tool. The young runner says he stood still for a full minute and a half one day and came out of it wiser and lighted. The priest says the church boiler is not only warm, it is proud. The widow says she can reach the second shelf now without pain because of the padded stool, and she sometimes sits just to sit because everything deserves a rest. He reads, then closes his eyes and walks the block in his head. He checks the door latches, he checks the railings. He imagines writing a letter to a landlord with polite steel. He nods to the woman watering her geraniums. He leaves exact change at the fruit stand and asks about a mother who is everybody's mother. He listens to a bus sigh. He tips his hat to a cat. He returns to the club and taps the nicked corner. In the room of his thoughts, the radio knows which trumpet to find. Health continues its math. Some days the balance sheet tilts toward comfort. Some days toward effort. The nurses keep their small holy rituals, a blanket straightened, a glass placed where it should be, a sentence that limits fear by giving it a clear border. A doctor explains how hearts argue with clocks. Tony nods. He has argued with clocks. He knows you never win, but you can negotiate. He adopts a practice. Each morning, before the first cart rattles by, he tells himself 3 instructions. Keep it simple, keep it steady, keep it kind. He says the words in a voice low enough to belong to prayer and ordinary enough to belong to a shopping list. The words are a rail he can grip without looking down. On rough mornings he says them twice. On softer mornings he hums them under his breath and allows himself the comfort of having nothing new to invent. Visitors from far away send news that does not ask the body for anything. A cousin from the Bronx writes about a market where the cheese smells like home. A kid from the block, grown into a decent man, writes about a first baby who sleeps with one hand raised as if claiming a seat in the world. A teacher writes about a class where kids, were asked to draw the block they love, and half of them drew a storefront with a light that looks exactly like the club at night time. In a medical place is built from steps that repeat: check, test, count, rest. A therapist suggests small walks. He does them like a soldier with a private war. 10 steps to the window, 10 steps back, 10 more on a good day. He treats every small lap as if it were a full turn around the old neighborhood. He reaches the end and pretends to buy an orange with exact change. He imagines the weight of it in his palm. He imagines handing it to a kid and saying, "Share." One afternoon, a nurse asks him about the hat she has seen in a photograph on a bedside table. He tells her it was not a hat so much as an expression. It kept the weather off and sent a message that no one needed to be afraid of a voice raised for no reason. He says a hat can broadcast calm if you teach it how. The nurse smiles and says she will try that with her own life. Calm looks good on everyone. Another day, a young doctor asks what the secret is to keeping a room from breaking into worries. Tony says, keep people busy with useful tasks and pour coffee. He says good conversation is not about news, it is about names. Ask about a mother. Ask about a child. Ask about a dog or a plant that will not learn to behave. He says if you put bread on the table and keep the radio low, the room will look after itself. The distance between East Harlem and Springfield is measured in more than miles. It is measured in sounds. The block vibrates with horns and boots and the small theatre of busy sidewalks. The medical center vibrates with rubber soles and wheels and the quiet decisions of people who carry charts. Yet in both places there is the same stubborn trust in routine. That trust keeps panic from becoming policy. Summer leans in. The letters say hydrants offer brief rain to children who run with open mouths. The barber hangs a little sign that says cool inside and means it. The bakery closes early on the worst afternoons and reopens just in time for evening bread and soft talk. The driver parks under a tree near the church and counts leaves until the bell tells him to keep moving. The runner turns errands into exercise and grows into his shoes. The fruit man cuts a melon with reverence and sends a slice to a widow who insists she will return the plate and actually does. Tony writes back in short lines that fit on webpage. The melon story is good. The hydrants are the same as ever, generous and loud. Tell the baker to rest on Sundays for a while. Tell the barber to teach a kid how to cut hair on a doll first. Tell the driver that gratitude is a kind of fuel. Tell the runner that patience has cousins named accuracy and decency. Invite them for dinner when they visit. Dinner will consist of memory and perspective, and maybe a cookie the nurses do not see. There are nights when sleep takes the scenic route. On those nights he watches the ceiling and listens to the building breathe. He imagines he is sitting on the bench near the club, where the length of a block can be judged by the length of a bus sigh. He thinks of names, titles, names, people who taught him about small duty. A barber who opens early for a widow, a landlord who listens to polite steel, a priest who understands that a joke is a sacrament in certain seasons. A kid who learned that standing still is not the same as being stuck. His own name appears in papers now only when a writer feels the need to rehearse the old titles. He allows the papers their habit. He keeps his own list. Steward, gardener, listener, man who prefers exact change, man who believes a grocery list is philosophy, man who likes red lights for the way they slow time to a pace the heart can manage. Midsummer brings news too large for letters. A doctor sits at the foot of the bed with the posture of a person who speaks for a living and does not enjoy this kind of speech. The words that follow are kind, exact, and unflinching. The balance sheet is not improving. The heart is tired. The lungs want easier work. No demand is made, only a proposition, comfort, dignity. A schedule with more mercy than ambition. He accepts like a man who has taken the weather as it comes for a long time. He asks about blankets, about windows, about a chair for a friend who might visit, about a pen that does not bleed through paper. He asked for a minute alone. He uses the minute to repeat his 3 lines. Keep it simple, keep it steady, keep it kind. He adds a 4th for the season. Keep it grateful. Word moves with care to East Harlem. It is not printed, it is carried. The room at the club knows how to lower its voice without lowering its hope. The barber whispers to his scissors. The bakery adds an extra knot to a loaf so the shape will hold. The driver parks near the church and lets the bell count a longer prayer. The runner walks a slower route with a full bag for 3 doorbells and shares a bench with an old man who tells him about the year the Yankees made a city forget its worries for an evening. Vinny writes a letter that is shorter than most and heavier. He says the room is in order. He says the elders are warm. He says a kid held a door for a woman who had nothing to carry, and that is how you know the block is still the block. He says there is a chair ready for whenever a good day allows a walk by the old window. He closes with the benediction Tony taught the room. Simple, steady, kind. In Springfield, a nurse tapes the letter to the wall where the light finds it each morning. A volunteer reads a passage from a book in a voice that carries the right amount of air. An orderly stops in to ask about baseball, even though he does not care about baseball. A chaplain nods as if he has been told a story he already knew by heart. The doctor adjusts a plan, the plan adjusts the day adjusts the room. Late summer glows through the window like a patient lamp. The walks are now measured in steps between bed and chair. The chair and the window keep up their end of the bargain. They support and they frame, and they do not ask for more than a body can give. The hat in the photograph becomes another kind of window. It looks back at him with the same simple promise it made on those cold corners. Do not rush. Dress the day with ordered. Nudge a room toward peace. A morning arrives that feels round and complete. Breakfast tastes like memory more than food. A nurse hums a song about sunlight. The building breathes with a measured kindness. A letter sits on the table from the barber, saying he has taught a teenager to hold a comb like a promise. Another letter says the church bell will ring twice that afternoon, for 2 weddings, an extravagance nobody minds. The runner writes that he can now stand still for a full 2 minutes, without wanting to fix a conversation that is not broken. He closes his eyes and walks the block one more time. He starts at the corner where the bus sighs like a tuba. He turns toward the fruit stand and tests the weight of an orange. He tips his hat to the cat. He crosses to the club and taps the nicked corner. He pours coffee for the room and reminds it to protect the rhythm. He checks the barber's chair and listens to the oil do its small miracle. He sends bread to a widow and writes a letter with polite steel to a landlord who has begun to forget his better self. He stands beside the driver at a red light and counts the bell. He watches a kid practice a layup without a ball and applauds without making a sound. He opens his eyes and sees the window as if for the first time. The square of light is stretched across the floor like a generous tablecloth. He places his palm in the light. Warmth recognizes warmth. He thanks the room in his head for learning to breathe. He thanks the nurses for the tone of their voices. He thanks the doctor for exact words. He thanks the block for stubborn decency. He thanks the hat in the photo for its service. He thanks bread for being bread. He thanks red lights for being teachers. Time, which had been pacing at the far end of the hall, steps closer. It does not raise its voice. It does not bang on the door. It simply nods like an usher at the end of a long performance. He nods back with the expert modesty of a man who has closed 1,000 rooms without scraping a chair. He sits easier. He breathes the way a city breathes when snow finally stops and the plows have done their careful work. The afternoon drifts. Somewhere a bell rings on a campus he has never seen. Somewhere a ball game plays to people who need a distraction. Somewhere a barber jokes with a kid and the kid learns the shape of a future. Somewhere a baker pulls a loaf and hears the good hollow knock. Somewhere a priest laughs at his own joke and pretends not to. Somewhere a runner stands still and feels the floor hold him like a promise. July in the outside world is a lemonade month. It asks people to sit on stoops and forgive the heat. In Nun Room in Springfield, the air rests like a hand on a shoulder. The nurses maintain their soft parade. The doctor reviews a chart with real respect. A chaplain pauses in the doorway and lets the silence work. The day becomes evening with the least possible drama. Word travels later that Tony has taken the longest walk there is, The one no map bothers to print. The message is simple and stern and kind. He passed in the summer at the Federal Medical Center in Springfield. The block does what blocks do. It lowers its voice. It raises its effort. It writes lists that look like groceries and are actually liturgy. It tells 100 small stories about a hat and a table and a barber and a boiler and a bell. It decides to treat grief not as a holiday, but as a workday for the heart. In East Harlem, the club is a room again. It remembers him without turning into a museum. The table with the nicked corner holds more elbows. The radio finds a trumpet that learned to be gentle without becoming dull. Vinny stands at the door and lets people enter the way a doorman lets weather in, with a nod that says we will be fine if we follow the rules of courtesy. The baker brings a loaf tied with string. The barber arrives with his oil. The driver parks near the church and counts the bell before joining the others. The runner sets a chair where an older man can see the window. No speeches, only a series of sentences about useful things. The widow is warm. The fruit stand needs a new latch. The church is collecting for a family that fell on hard luck. The kid who learned to stand still is ready for more responsibility. The ledger opens with grocery handwriting and welcomes another careful line. The hat hook holds its empty promise with grace. There is a moment that belongs to the room alone. It is not grand. It is exactly right. Vinny taps the nicked corner with 2 knuckles. The sound is a small bell. The men breathe out and then in, and the rhythm resumes. Simple, steady, kind, grateful. 4 words, enough to carry a block into whatever weather waits around the corner. Outside, night arrives with its usual respectful posture. A bus sighs. A cat makes the safe choice. A window glows with the color of company. The street accepts the weight of memory and carries it, like an older brother carries a sleeping child. No struggle, no show, just care. The city is good at that when it remembers. In Springfield, a nurse finishes paperwork with a neat hand and pauses to think about the man who said a hat can broadcast calm. She decides she will buy a hat. In the Bronx, a cousin leaves a slice of cheese out of the refrigerator long enough to taste like a story and smiles. In the club, the radio chooses a trumpet that says thank you without needing applause. The block will go on counting bells and fixing latches and treating red lights like teachers. It will send bread to doors where bread is medicine. It will write letters with polite steel. It will teach kids that patience is a family of virtues and that accuracy and decency are the cousins who visit most often. It will remember a man who called himself a steward and who believed a grocery list could hold a city together if people read it with care. On a quiet morning soon after, the church bell counts the hour. The driver listens as if the bell has been promoted. The barber opens the shop and sweeps the already clean floor. The baker ties string around a loaf with the precision of a tailor. The runner carries 3 small bags to 3 doorbells and does not wait to be thanked. Vinny stands in the doorway of the club and watches the block perform its ordinary miracle. He nods to the world in the tone of the man he served. Protect the rhythm. Pay attention. Let the block breathe. Chapter 10. The storefront remains. Years fold themselves into the grain of a block. New hands grip old rails. New voices inherit the corners where the air turns. On East 115th Street the storefront sits, the way it always has, a calm punctuation mark between sentences the city keeps writing. The glass holds a familiar light. The floor remembers old footsteps in its quiet bones. People pass who never knew, a man with a hat and a cigar, and people pass who could draw the hat from memory. The storefront remains, not as a shrine and not as a secret, but as a room where ordinary has learned dignity. Morning arrives with sugar and steam. The bakery door opens as if pulled by a gentle magnet. The barber sweeps the already clean floor because tradition is a kind of hygiene. The church bell counts an hour that belongs to everyone. The club keeps its quiet, a living room more than a stage. The table with the nicked corner still stands its patient watch. Once in a while a forearm settles there and feels the old anchor point, and the arm relaxes as if in conversation with a friend who never forgot your name. Vinny carries keys that weigh the same as they always did, though the metal is newer. He opens the door with the same care he once used to fold a schedule. He places a simple cup on the table and checks the latch on the back door. He flips the radio to a station that respects trumpets. He moves deliberately through the room, a steward making sure the room remembers how to be itself. The hat hook waits, polite, content to hold nothing today. The young runner is no longer a runner. He has become the man who stands still for a full minute before deciding where to stand next. His cap fits less tight. His shoulders carry more sense. He has learned that errands are sermons when done with care. He speaks in a limestone voice shaped by years of calm and a few seasons of necessary silence. He keeps the ledger neat in a hand that still prefers the grocery style. Light bulbs, coffee, a latch, a sweater, a loaf. The city can call it what it wants. He calls it a day well kept. The block has changed in the way healthy blocks change, families shuffle, languages braid. A new shop sells spices that turn the air into a geography lesson. A mural covers a stubborn wall with a story about hands passing bread through seasons. Kids on scooters draw bright punctuation marks down the sidewalk, and the old men argue baseball with the patience of historians who enjoy being slightly wrong in public. Film crews visit sometimes, polite as guests who want a photograph with good manners. They ask for afternoon light and leave footprints shaped like cables and caution. Vinny nods, lets them work, and reminds them that the block is a living room. Please wipe your feet on your way in. Please speak softly to the air. Please remember that a window has moods. They thank him. They keep the volume low. When they go, the block exhales and returns to its language of bread and greetings. On certain days, strangers pause at the glass and press curiosity to the pane. A guidebook might have sent them to look at a piece of history. They expect a plaque. They find instead a room that smells of coffee and effort, a radio that trusts horns, a table that does not brag about the elbows it has held. If someone steps inside, they are received the way a library receives a child who promises to whisper. They find no speeches, only chairs that squeak politely and a ledger that looks like any other list in any other room where people care about living decently. The block does not practice nostalgia as an art, it practices continuity. A landlord with a short memory receives a letter written with polite steel and remembers the agreement that kept a widow warm one winter long ago and is still a good agreement now. A boy who sprints toward trouble learns to lean against the railing and count the bell with a driver who has made counting an honest religion. A barber hands a comb to a teenager and says, "Hold it like a promise." The teenager grins and discovers his fingers want to behave. The storefront reflects seasons the way a lake reflects sky. In summer, the door stays open a cautious inch so the breeze can visit without stealing the papers. In winter, the room learns to be a small furnace. Spring smells like wet concrete and warm bread. Autumn tastes like apples carried in old bags with careful handles. Through each season, the table with the nicked corner remains, a quiet fact in a city that enjoys changing outfits. Neighbors speak of the man who used to tip his hat and tap the corner with 2 knuckles. They do not speak in headlines. They speak in small, present-tense sentences that treat memory as advice. He liked exact change. He loved red lights. He trusted errands more than speeches. He taught a boy to wait before he spoke, and the boy learned that silence can be a good teacher. He believed that bread and kindness can be the same thing if you arrange them properly. In this telling there are no titles, only roles. Steward, listener, gardener of hours. When talk turns to larger maps and older trials, the room stays respectful, but does not let itself become a courtroom. The law had its day. The block has every day. People learned what they learned. People changed how they stand, and how they answer, and how they write lists that might someday be read by strangers. The storefront remains a place where a neighborhood puts its shoulders into decency and lets history take care of itself outside the door. The church bell earns more attention than it used to. The driver touches the brim of a cap that is not a hat and counts the notes with the precision of a man who has fought impatience and won just enough battles to feel better about his temper. He shares the practice with a kid who has never met a payphone and never will. The kid counts along, first as a favor, then as a habit, then as a preference. He learns that counting is a cousin of listening. Some afternoons, light falls through the window like a promise. It lands across the old table like a soft tablecloth. Vinny pauses and places his palm in the light. It is not ceremony, it is posture. Then he moves on to the latch, the ledger, the radio. The room appreciates his devotion to simple tasks. He is the sort of man a room trusts with its temperature. A woman with strong hands and a wiser back now sits on a padded stool to peel potatoes. She sends a small folded thank you through the door once a year, written in large cursive with stern kindness. Thank you for not forgetting the small things. The ledger records the note with one line, potatoes safe. The room receives the line as if it were scripture. The barber teaches a second apprentice how to oil a chair until the squeed becomes a story about improvement. He says oil is a promise that tomorrow will not ignore yesterday. He tells the kid to treat hair like a cloud and hands like weather. They both laugh. The apprentice learns to keep the broom moving in a rhythm that respectfully answers the street's tempo. Not far from the club, a school class files past on a field trip about neighborhood history. The teacher speaks gently about the block as an organism. She points to the bakery steaming patience into the air, to the barber practicing inherited courtesy, to the church bell that refuses to give up on shared time, to the storefront that has been a living room for people who believe in modest solutions. She tells the children that hero is a word that fits badly on shoulders made for sweaters. Steward fits better. They nod like small judges who have handed down a good sentence. In the afternoons, an older man who once drove circuit routes parks near the church and rests his hands in his lap. He watches shadows draw their slow map down the block. Once in a while he closes his eyes and hears an engine that is not his and a bell that is everyone's. He breathes like a metronome. He considers all the hours he has given to waiting and feels rich. Evenings host small theatre. A kid makes a sidewalk speech about a basketball team, using his arms like punctuation. A grandmother calls a second-floor window and a voice answers with the comfort of home. A cat makes a decision in public and receives polite applause from a row of astute philosophers. The storefront casts a rectangle of warm light onto the sidewalk, like a simple blessing. The door opens and closes with the quiet clicks of a librarian's daydream. Once, on a drizzly night, two men in suits with the wrong shoulders return and stand across the street rehearsing interest. They are not unkind, they are out of tune. The room recognizes the melody and chooses to lower the volume rather than change the song. Vinny shifts a chair. The runner, now a man with a steadier gaze, shortens a conversation. The radio finds a trumpet that respects rain. The men move on without a story to carry away. The city keeps inviting the block to argue with its own reflection. The block declines on principle. It chooses chores. It chooses errands that make a polite difference. It chooses letters written with steel dipped in respect. It chooses to count bells and red lights and the number of times a door opens for someone who prefers to carry pride more than groceries. Inside the room, a photo on the back wall continues to curl at the edges in a beautiful way, as if memory wants to show you it has been handled. A new postcard joins it, a picture of a beach sent by a cousin who swears the water tastes like oysters and laughter. On the back, a line that says, "Be generous." The room is already trying. It keeps the instruction on the wall where the light can read it every morning. The ledger collects marginalia that look like recipes for weather. Hat day, 2 hats, no hats, coffee before talk, light bulb for back stair, call from priest, bread to 3rd floor. Threaded through are the old reminders that once carried a city through heavier seasons. Keep it simple, keep it steady, keep it kind, keep it grateful. When the day tries to rush, the ledger asks it to walk. A man in his middle years who grew up in the neighborhood returns after a decade away and stands in the doorway like a person who does not trust his own eyes. He sees the table, the nick, the cup, the radio, the ledger. He laughs softly and wipes his eyes with the heel of his hand. He says he used to think calm was boring. Then he tried chaos. He asks if the club needs anything. Vinny hands him a small list, a latch, 2 bulbs, coffee. He leaves smiling because the list feels like a map back to himself. The block is working class and proud of it. Pride does not strut. Pride shows up 5 minutes early and stays to stack chairs. Pride carries soup up a narrow stair and does not mention it later. Pride writes a letter that makes a landlord find his better self. Pride puts on a coat and holds a door in winter. Pride buys the first melon of summer and takes the second slice to a neighbor who always returns plates. When the city changes its clock by law and the sun decides to agree reluctantly, the storefront adjusts with patience. Morning glows inside the glass at a new hour. Evening sits a little later on the sill. People step in and someone says the time is a suggestion anyway. The radio nods and finds a song that has kept good time for half a century. On a warm Saturday, the church holds a fair in the lot, a small carnival of generosity. The club sends a folded table and 2 willing backs to carry it. The barber provides free trims for kids who agree to promise their mothers that they will wear hats in winter. The bakery donates loaves tied with string that look like gifts and taste like community. Vinny arranges the booth so the line moves with dignity. The ledger receives a new entry later that reads like a prayer. Fewer worries today. There are nights when the city tells old stories about grand tables and famous trials. A documentary plays somewhere with solemn music, and a narrator who likes the sound of his own certainty. Someone in the room clicks the volume down. The narrator continues on a smaller scale, less convinced of himself. The men listen until the music ends and then return to weather, to bread, to the listings of a week that will always need tending. One autumn afternoon, a tourist in comfortable shoes asks an unhelpful question. Is this the place where power lived? The runner, now the listener with a ledger, answers with a sentence shaped like a broom. Power lived in the city. This is where routine lived. Routine kept the old warm and the young from tripping over their own hurry. The tourist nods, blinks at the simplicity, and takes a photograph of the door as if the door were a teacher. He is determined to remember. In winter, when early dark makes streets feel like deep pockets, the storefront becomes more lantern than room. People slip inside to warm their voices before saying what they came to say. The radio rests under a wool of low volume. The ledger opens to make room for a line about salt for the steps and a reminder to check on the 3rd floor on days the mail comes late. These are small sentences that argue against despair better than speeches do. Time gives every address a test. The test is whether a room can hold its use after the names change. The club passes the test by staying useful. It is a safe kitchen table where a tired person can be reminded that a list is a way through confusion. It is a hallway where errands receive assignments. It is a bench with walls where a man can count bells until he remembers his own breath belongs to him. The city's newest watchers wander through on occasion, eyes brimming with the training of data and dashboards. They stand at the edge of the light like thoughtful owls. They do not see command boards or flowcharts. They see a ledger about light bulbs. They see a box tied with string. They see men who have chosen moderation as a craft. Some of them leave puzzled. Some of them leave relieved. A few of them leave with a new softness in their posture that they will not take credit for. Stories continue to arrive from far branches of the old tree. A cousin in the Bronx swears the best cheese still needs to breathe before it sings. A retired court officer tells a funny story about a day when every elevator broke and patients kept the building upright. A nurse from far away writes a note about a hat that broadcasts calm and says she wore out to work and her ward learned a better rhythm that day. These are the kind of reports the room was built to receive. The nicked corner receives a tap from time to time, not every day, not as ritual exactly. More like a handshake with memory when memory wanders through and asks for a seat. The sound is soft, a private bell for ears that know what to listen for. When someone new asks about the gesture, the explanation is simple. It is the room checking its own pulse. There are setbacks. There are. A night when anger makes an unnecessary speech on the sidewalk. A week when a landlord forgets the promise and needs a letter written with fresh steel. A month when work dries and pride threatens to become a brittle thing. The room adjusts by lowering volume and increase errands. The ledger grows a second page for a while, then returns to one. The block tightens its ties and remembers that generosity is sometimes a strict aunt who makes you put your shoes away before dessert. Spring returns, and with it, the old hydra of chores, a latch to replace, a railing to check, a street tree to protect with simple posts that say not with words but with posture that it belongs. The club organises these small labours the way a conductor points and the orchestra does not argue. Children carry twine, elders carry instructions. Middle people carry the heavier things. When the work is done, bread appears from nowhere. Coffee arrives steaming. Someone tells a joke that has lived 100 lives and still makes the room generous with laughter. The runner-turned-steward finds himself giving quiet advice to a kid who has begun to run too fast toward a kind of spotlight that offers warmth and burns crowds at the same time. He tells the kid about red lights and bells and bread. He tells him patience is not a brake only, it is also a compass. The kid nods, uncomfortable with wisdom that does not flatter him, but grateful. Later, he carries a loaf up a stair with dignity and puts his hand on a railing he helped tighten and understands more. Dust motes in the afternoon light dance like a minute parade above the table. The radio picks a trumpet that remembers the old lessons without repeating them like a scold. A man stops by with a petition about a new bench in a small park. The room supports it. Benches are schools. They teach stillness and conversation and the art of looking at a tree without asking anything from it but shade. The ledger enters a line with quiet pride, bench letter signed. Time does a curious trick. It makes legend simpler and people more interesting. The legend resolves into a silhouette of a hat and a rule about steady hands. The people in the room grow in detail. The driver now collects bells like coins. The barber keeps a drawer of combs that have outlived their teeth, a retirement home for tools that served. The baker has learned to tie string with a flourish that makes children applaud. The church bell experiments with ringing a minute early and then repents and returns to schedule, reminding everyone that order is a friendly habit when you treat it kindly. If you ask the room what it is now, the answer is almost rude in its simplicity. It is a room where a block remembers itself. When big stories storm past on their way to awards and conferences, this is where smaller stories are folded, set in a drawer, and taken out later when a person needs to be reminded that decency is a schedule you keep, even when no one is taking attendance. In late summer, a man with a notebook sits outside on a milk crate, writing sentences that try to be picturesque. He is visiting from elsewhere. He wants to capture the block. The runner-turned-steward brings him coffee and says capture is the wrong verb. Let the block breathe near your words, he suggests. The man nods and scratches out a paragraph. The coffee tastes like a correction he needed. Night has adopted the block as a student. It arrives and leaves with better manners now. The streetlights collaborate. Windows trade gentle signals. The storefront dims but does not disappear. You can read a face in the glass if the face wants to be read. You can walk past as a shadow if you need to. The block accepts both. It has learned that hospitality includes the right to be left alone. Once every long while, someone opens the door with eyes that carry a particular weather. They ask in a quiet voice what to do with regret. The room answers with a list. Carry something useful to a person who did not ask. Fix a small thing that has been broken too long. Learn the names of people you ignore. Count bells, count breaths, write a letter with polite steel and sign it with your full name. Bake something or buy it from a person who bakes better than you do and deliver it without waiting for applause. The person nods and leaves lighter. The ledger changes nothing. The room earns its keep. Years from now, the city will tell new stories about new people who inherited old problems. The storefront will be there if the block wants it. If destiny moves the room, the nicked corner will travel as a relic and be installed into a new table where elbows can find their way again. The spirit is not nailed to an address. It is nailed to a practice. Simple, steady, kind, grateful. Tonight, though, the address is the same. The chairs sit under tables like tired cats under beds. The radio kisses the air with a last trumpet. The ledger closes with a ribbon tucked at the right page. The light in the window flickers once in a friendly way and then commits to its hush. The door closes with the sound of a library book finding its shelf. Outside, a bus sighs, a cat chooses safety, a window promises company, and the air tastes faintly of sugar and wool. The storefront remains, not as a monument, as a neighbour. Vinny takes a last look up and down the block. He sees no drama and counts that as a victory. He taps the nicked corner with 2 knuckles. The sound is small and complete. He says the 4 words the room still needs. Keep it simple, keep it steady, keep it kind, keep it grateful. The block, which has ears in its concrete, hears him, and answer with a soft, collective nod. A kid on a scooter skids to a halt at the curb and watches the door close. He decides to aim for balance on his next run. A grandmother waters her geraniums with the art of a conductor. A landlord reads a letter with polite steel and chooses to be better because people are watching. A teacher writes tomorrow's lesson about neighbours and writes the words "be generous" at the top of the page. A driver sits in his car and waits for the bell so he can count it like a man tucking coins into a jar named patience. The city moves around the block like a river around a trusted stone. It carries news, plans, ambitions, theories, maps, and tides. The stone does not pretend to hold back the water. It makes a quiet eddy where minnows can rest, and a parent can point and say, "Here is where you can catch your breath." That is enough. That has always been enough. When morning returns, as it will, the bakery will open and let sugar escape like a rumor you want to believe. The barber will sweep the already clean floor and call it exercise. The church bell will count the hour without apology. The door will open and the room will wake like a polite host. The ledger will collect a line about a latch. Coffee will pour. A kid will learn to hold still for 20 heartbeats, then 30, then more. Bread will travel up a stair and be medicine again. The storefront remains. The block breathes.